So I'd like to call this special workshop session of the West Dallas West Milwaukee School District to order, please. Is that if we could please do roll call?
Mr. Ustra,
Here.
Mr. Keller,
Here.
Mr. Schultz,
Here.
Mr. Sikich is excused, Mr. Lee,
Here.
Mrs. Kaiser,
Here.
Ms. Klug,
Here.
Mrs. Justum,
Here. Can you hear me?
we can hear you. Thank you. President Emmons.
Here. Okay, so a couple things real quick. If you are here as a viewer of the meeting, if you could please make sure that you are muted so we can make sure that we can have the conversation. That would be most helpful, please. And then as we begin the presentation part for the workshop, I will ask that all questions be held until the end so that we can make sure that we get through the content. And oftentimes those questions wind up getting answered during the presentation. So if you want to make notes of those so that we can come back to them and make sure that they are addressed before we move on to the second workshop for the evening. So then if there's no further ado, we will go ahead and get started. And so item 7.1 on tonight's agenda is review and discuss the draft of the reopening school plan. Dr. Lexman, turn it over to you.
Great, thank you. And in a second, I will share my screen. Just so we're all on the same page, in a workshop for the number of teachers and parents that may be joining us, when Stephanie, the board president, referred to, please hold questions till the end, that means questions for the board. The board does not accept public comment during workshop meetings. It's really a learning opportunity for the board for us to go a little deeper into a specific area. And in this case, it's our draft of our returning to school plan. And so, and that was just for clarification's sake. So with that, I'm going to share my screen and jump into the presentation. Okay, and so what I'm sharing is a presentation that we used for the returning to school committee. That was last Friday on the 17th. And so it's been updated since then. And we noted some slides that are new for the board workshop this evening. And I won't go into detail on every of the slides that we touched on because the committee provided some initial direction, and I wanted to spend more time on where the committee landed and what they thought made sense for us as we continue to work on our returning to school plan. And so this is just some introductory information. The board has had access to the presentation as it's evolved. So hopefully the board has had an opportunity to take a look at some of this. It really is an acknowledgement that we're in an odd space like every other district in the state, in the country, on really trying to figure out how do we best serve students, families, teachers, staff, or larger community. As we work through something that no one knows really well how to do. And I think it's just an honest acknowledgement of where we are. On the agenda that we set with the committee, it was long and we went really fast. And I probably will talk fast this evening as we work through this so we get into the discussion question phase of this. I'm not going to touch on everything here, but I do want to note what we're here to do, what we're not here to do at this point. We established some guiding principles. I want to touch on that. I want to touch on survey data. The board has already seen that a couple of times from parents and from teachers and educational assistants. I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail about the advantages and disadvantages of the various options DPI put out, which are called in-person, distance learning, and virtual options. It's all laid out in the presentation. Again, I want to get to kind of where we are in trying to move forward. And based on the survey data and the options DPI presented, we really think, like many districts, we have to find a hybrid that best meets the differing needs of families and teachers in particular. And then we'll talk about the various hybrid options. And so with that, I'm going to skip through the virtual meeting protocol. We've gotten pretty good at this over the months. So what we're here to do, we're going to stay on time and on task. That was really more for the committee than for us, but we want to use our time well. We're not going to ask the board to give questions on the Google Doc, which is so the board and then our community sees how we're managing ourselves as we build our plan. Again, like I said, a balanced way to meet family and employee needs. In the committee, we've been open to each other's thoughts and ideas. We really need a general direction, and that's really the purpose of bringing this forward to a board workshop. And then also, so the board is aware, the large committee, which is made up of 40 plus people, nearly 50, it also breaks out into various work teams that are developing more specific kind of guidelines and protocols. And the one I think is a great example to use like right now is, what's the protocol for cleaning the buses? If we want them cleaned to a standard that's different than what our transportation provider has. There's some things we're not going to be doing. We're going to stay on time. And I think it's important that this is included in what we're not here to do is attend to political opinions. I think it's unfortunate, but it's real, and I think I have to acknowledge it, that so much of the decision about how to reopen schools is influenced by political opinions these days. And I made that clear to the committee that we're not here to address political opinions. We're here to do two things. That's address student learning needs and address public health needs. And our job, I think, as kind of a major player in our communities, where people come together, is figure out what's the best solution to address both of those needs, student learning and public health. Of how fast things change. Some of these events are so far down the road, it's not worth our time right now. There's many, many other things that our time requires. And then we're not taking on the role of communications about the plan. We asked the committee not to do that. This is really going to be coordinated by our district staff once we get a general sense of direction. And we're trying to we started last Friday with a regular Friday update out to parents and employees about here's where we are at the end of this week. We're not here to determine what personal protective equipment students or staff has to wear. It really is the question, masks or no masks. That will come as we work through this. So we've been listening to stakeholders. We did surveys of families and professional educators. We had over 3,000 families respond, which is almost half, which is really good. And almost all teachers and educational assistants responded. So we think we have pretty good survey data to use to help us create our plan. Then I've talked about the large committee, and then we've set some guiding principles as we work forward. In terms of what we're paying attention to, it's the City of West Allis Health Department, but I do want to share with everybody that we do have a meeting scheduled tomorrow with the 4 health departments that are connected to our school district. So all 4 municipalities will be in the same meeting. And even though we're going to rely most heavily on the West Allis Department of Health, and that's because the majority of our schools, the majority of our families are from West Allis, and we're trying to reconcile differing guidance. I think it's a waste of time, given what we're trying to figure out right now, how complicated it is. We're attending the Centers for Disease Control guidance, the Wisconsin Department of Health Services, and DPI, as I mentioned. So in terms of guidance and principles, I've touched on this a little bit already. The first one is safety and well-being, and that includes a number of things to keep staff, students, families safe, consistent with guidance, and it also includes social emotional learning needs. And if you're following media on this, especially on the education side, there's a lot in the discussion in media about the needs of kids, the needs of employees, and so that's part of the work of some of the work teams. The second one is really focusing on learning that works for all, and we believe that if there's a hybrid model, it means we're going to have some kids in person, some kids 2 days in person, and some kids all virtual, and making sure this works for all kids. And part of that effort is actually the next workshop on adopting a learning management system, a platform that helps us coordinate across the various options. It has to be responsive and flexible. And family needs are changing. The board has received email. I've received email separately as the dynamics around community transmission of COVID-19 change, as we see reports of really explosions in other parts of the country of disease transmission and hospitalizations. We're getting contacted by families that says they would like to change their mind about what they picked when we surveyed them. And that's not just true for us. It's true for some of the neighboring school districts. I speak with our immediate neighboring superintendents every single Tuesday at noon. And districts that got ahead of their plan are now starting to realize they may need to rethink it based on kind of the feedback from parents that, are changing their minds based on what they're reading and seeing around community transmission. The next guiding principle is practicality of implementation. So we can have the most elaborate plans that we think are going to keep everybody perfectly safe, but we actually can't do them. So that things have to be practical, they have to be within budget, and I think they should provide for a gradual reopening to allow staff to learn and adjust. Like I said at the beginning, we don't really know how to run schools in this environment. We don't know what kind of cleaning is required. We have to learn about isolation practices when we have an employee that is informed they test positive and they're at work, or a family realizes that somebody in the household had tested positive, and how we adjust. So I think gradual reopening makes sense. So we learn to get good at the new kind of work we need to do in education, given these circumstances. So the survey data, real quick, and this is part of the dynamic to try to resolve with a hybrid model, is when we, again, this was now a couple weeks back before so much has changed, but in-person was 53% for parents, meaning 5 days a week, I want my kids back in school. Distance is 2 days a week, so about 24% of parents, that was their first choice, and about 19% virtual. We expected, so myself and the leadership team, a much higher percentage of in-person, so meaning 5 full days per week kind of school as normal, than what came back even a few weeks ago. So that was a little bit of a surprise, and teachers and EAs landed in a very different place, with 26% wanting to, their first choice is we should come back in person. 45% their first choice was 2 days a week, and that provides the best opportunity for both in-face and social distancing, because you only have essentially half of the kids or fewer, because some kids will stay virtual. And about 28% of teachers and EAs wanted virtual as their first choice. So this really gives the ground for why we should consider a hybrid model and a gradual opening. So I'm not going to go into the details in these slides. It's just, again, what DPI recommended and what we surveyed on are in person. So schools running as normal 5 days a week. Distance learning is, there's 4 days of school of kids in buildings, but kids come for 2 days. So example, a cohort may come Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday's a work day, cleaning day, work day for teachers and a cleaning day, and another cohort of kids comes Thursday, Friday. So that allows you to reduce class size, but it means you've got kids learning virtually 3 days a week, and it creates the challenge of, like, well, who's teaching the virtual kids, because we have kids in school face-to-face 4 of 5 days a week. The last one is virtual learning, and this is one thing that we've gotten better at, and we know somewhat how to do it at scale. Although there are things that need to be improved here, and for flexibility and virtual learning to be really effective for all kids, so learning that works for all, is why we're considering the LMS, and that'll be the next workshop. So hybrid options, of why we started to really talk about various hybrid options. So really, how can we meet the needs of most families? And essentially it means, can we do all 3 of the above, in-person, distance, and virtual? Is there a way for us to better meet the needs of teachers and EAs? The third bullet I just touched on. A hybrid option, by doing all 3 at once, it provides for that flexibility of shifting from in-person to virtual if and as needed, and it is likely that, especially if we're going to, us and other districts are opening in September, that we're going to see disease spread in schools. It is, outside of not having in-person school, it's impossible not to. Like, there's no way for us to promise that we can keep COVID-19 out of schools. And I think it's would simply be an untruth. So I think we have to be honest about it, and the reality that we've got to be able to shift back and forth as things change. And I think in the language I've been using, that we're trying to be thoughtful and gradual. And it's a little bit of why we're taking a slow course to finding our solution for our communities. Many districts have announced already, and they're going to have to adapt and adjust. And I'd rather be slow and thoughtful and communicate a plan, kind of try to do it well once, knowing that it may still change, than getting out in front of it, having communicated the plan, and then have to re-communicate a different plan. There are some assumptions with all of the hybrid options we talked about. At this point, I think it makes sense that we start school a week late. And that is really to provide additional teacher planning time around learning a learning management system, and also new health and safety training that teachers are going to need to be introduced to. One of the pieces of feedback in the comments from teachers in EAs is related to concerns about having to teach in-person kids, and some kids that I only see 2 days a week, and virtual kids all at the same time. And the reality for secondary teachers is that's probably the solution we're going to have to land on. And it has to do more with high school certification and making sure all of those things are handled properly. So having some more time up front before we bring kids into school, and more time during the school year, which I'll get to support especially secondary teachers that are having to teach in multiple modes, it gets to be really important. All of the hybrid options really begin elementary in person and secondary all virtual. Again, it provides us time to let's try on some kids face to face. Starting with elementary better meets the needs of parents. And so the survey data I shared here are really the high level. When you drill into what percent of elementary only parents pick in person as their first choice, that percentage goes much higher. And that makes sense to me. It makes sense to us because working parents that have only elementary kids also need childcare during the day. And we know that that's part of what schools provide. It's not only that we're there to help kids learn and grow, but it's also we take care of kids during the day while their parents work. And that's a good thing that we're able to provide that service. So starting with elementary is why to meet parent needs. At this point, one of the assumptions is elementary schools would have a separate cohort of virtual only teachers. So, elementary teachers can adapt a little bit based on their certification. You know, a third grade teacher that now can also teach fifth grade, right, or first grade. And that's different than secondary teachers. An assumption is that secondary teachers would have additional planning and work days built in, and we're suggesting weekly. And secondary teachers, like I said, will teach in-person and virtual students all in the same classes. And we're trying to figure out a solution that would be mostly synchronous. So if I was a U.S. history teacher, so if I'm a U.S. history teacher at Central and I've got 15 of my students in front of me and we try to socially distance, it's possible that we may be broadcasting lessons. So virtual kids would log into my first hour class at their normal first hour time and participate in class that way, and then complete other tasks online as we did in the spring. So the first one, and again, I'm not going to go really into detail here because it's hybrid option 3 that we're going to focus on. But we started just thinking about, okay, so again, elementary starts. When we bring secondary in, we limit transitions. And this one I like because it's safest, meaning kids show up in intermediate or high school, they stay in their home base all day. They take classes as if they're virtual. So they're taking virtual courses, but they're in school. And it limits all of the transition. So there's less likelihood of disease spread, of fewer transitions in the hall. We don't like it because we think teenagers won't appreciate this kind of experience of school. If I'm going to come back to school and have to sit in the same room all day, I might as well, stay at home and sit at my kitchen table and learn. Hybrid option 2, the difference here, we would have normal transitions when we start secondary school. Again, we'd phase in starting with elementary. And this would be 5 days. And so what we don't like about this is we're expecting secondary teachers to teach 5 days a week. Then there's not time for them to, adapt to the 2-day-a-week kids, the virtual only kids. And so that one was not as appealing. And hybrid 3 is where we really started to focus with the returning to school committee. And we did, just so the board hears and folks that are chiming in. So when we worked through that meeting this past Friday, I worked through all of this in more detail. with the committee, and then we paused and we launched everybody into just random groups to just now talk to each other about, okay, process this with each other of what you think makes the most sense for us right now, and help us kind of set a general direction of how we continue to plan and move forward. Then we talked and answered some more questions about this hybrid option 3. And then we took a poll towards the end of the meeting, and 97%, so it's, again, I said 40 plus, so meaning 3% of the committee supported a different option, and that was option 1, which essentially means one person wanted option 1 as the direction we should head. Everybody else wanted this option. And so we felt pretty good about that, and again, this is teachers, it is educational assistants, it's principals, it's district leadership, and it also includes members of the West Allis Health Department. I don't know of Zach from our Wellness Center, but he's advising on the committee as well. I don't know if he was in attendance when we took the quick poll, but it's not just educators looking at this when we took the poll. So this one is the piece where there's 4 days of secondary. So elementary schools provide 5-day in-person instruction. Distance learning elementary students attend 2 days per week, so they would flow into classrooms. But today we started talking about even a variation of hybrid 3, depending on how the actual kind of choice by parents plays out in each school. We may end up identifying a site as the distance learning elementary school. And the example I use and have used with principals is, let's say, as we're going to be asking parents this week, now, which one do you want your kid signed up for by kid? Is your kid signing up for in-person, distance, meaning the 2-day a week, or all virtual? And we need that by kid by school. Well, what if we only have 20% of the kids at Madison that want 5-day in person? Well, we can't run Madison that way. So we're going to, then those students are going to need to, will probably be offered a choice. You could go to Wilson, where your principal is, or you could go to Walker, which is the next nearest elementary school. It opens a building, then we potentially have a building that's only for the distance elementary kids, meaning kids that come Monday, Tuesday, kids that come Thursday, Friday. So that's a variation of this, that was just kind of over the weekend, and my thinking, Deidre's thinking, and the directors talking today. And so in 3 days, things change. Secondary or distance learning students are going to access all learning using a virtual platform such as Canvas or Schoology, which Deidre will talk about in the next workshop. Then each 4 weeks, we consider expanding to adding secondary school or adding transitions in secondary schools. And so we've kind of set 4 week as just kind of a natural kind of the end of each month as a way to look at what are the metrics telling us, or do we feel confident in the way we're managing in-person learning in elementary schools, and are we ready to take a step forward? We don't know what the metrics will be at this point in terms of kind of health and safety metrics. Again, like I said, I have a meeting with all of the health department leads. A number of us do tomorrow, and there's several things on the agenda, and I'll touch on that at some point here. One of which is metrics to phase the plan in. So we want to get those established and communicated. And then when we do add intermediate and high schools, we would run the normal schedule when in-person begins on either the 5 or 2 days based on disease metrics. One of the things that we think probably gets added to this is that it's in the description above, it would be 4 days of in-person school and secondary school. So all secondary schools would run Monday, Tuesday, and then Thursday, Friday. The Wednesday would be a day for additional cleaning and a work day for teachers, because for secondary teachers, remember they're teaching their regular kids that come all 4 days, plus kids that then show up just 2 days, and then another group that shows up 2 days, and their virtual kids. So I think it's asking a lot of teachers, but like I said earlier, in terms of managing certifications, we haven't figured out a better solution yet. There may be, but we haven't found one yet. So adding additional time, Ann Garenser, the president of the Teachers Association, she and I are in quite a bit of email exchange and phone conversation. And as you might imagine, there's some advocacy for elementary teachers also, just given the strange kind of circumstances of all of this, to have some additional planning work time. And I don't know if that's every week, because that doesn't really meet what most elementary only parents need, which is 5 days during the week. It might mean that maybe once a quarter we take a couple days, so it's predictable for parents, but it's not every week that I've got to worry about how to take care of my, I only have elementary kids. And the reason I keep focusing on that, if you're an elementary and a high school parent, well, then you have somebody to watch the elementary kid if there's no school on a Wednesday, right? And so for elementary only parents, they don't have that kind of dynamic built in. So that's kind of where we are at this point. Again, one of the assumptions is we start a week later to support additional kind of learning and training time for teachers. We start with elementary in 5 days, then we probably phase in the 2-day. So 2-day kids and virtual kids all start learning virtually. Then based on metrics, we look at the end of September. Are we ready to add in secondary, and it may be that we don't add all of it at once, or it might. And then the assumption that there's additional kind of work time on Wednesdays for secondary teachers is kind of where we are with all of it. So this is some implementation. Oh, I think I already touched on a bunch of these. So these are slides that are new for the board workshop. I've talked already about as health conditions improve, so the metrics. Beginning in person with elementary. This is new, and it's shown up in a number of kind of the media and the articles in education around this. And I think we probably should start in person and launch our high needs special education services 5 days a week. That's a population of students for whom virtual learning is not ideal. For whom it's not learning at all. And the social aspects of being in school, being with teachers are really important. And a number of those young people that really have unique special education needs, they're regressing, regressed during the spring and are further regressing during the summer. And so now there's really guidance in the educational literature around this, that we should probably bring those students back to school. And I think it's possible if we're beginning elementary. And I think it's also an opportunity to just try on in-person learning in intermediate schools with the kids that need it the most. And so that's kind of the implementation ideas. Again, just as the board has got an email based on what parents thought their choice was 2 weeks ago, this may change 2 weeks from now. And so the idea of being adaptable and flexible gets to be really important. And like I said, a weekly planning day for secondary teachers and maybe 2 additional days per quarter for elementary. Then we launched into work teams. They had a charge to start, okay, given hybrid 3, what are the next 2 things we need to start to define? And I'll give the board and those watching the example. There's an operations team. And so Caitlin is leading that team that has, technology, transportation, food service, a whole bunch of other things underneath it. Well, the obvious ones that need to get defined right away for option 3 is transportation and food service. Right? So the board went into a bunch of the questions about cleaning buses. We're not prepared to answer more detailed questions tonight. We're just trying to focus on what's the general direction we're heading to return to school. And the same is true around food service, but that's why there are work teams, and we're giving half or even more than half of the meeting time on Fridays to work teams to start laying out the protocols. On the health and safety team, one of the obvious things, that the protocol around employee or student isolation, should there be a directive from a health department or a report from home that somebody tested positive or is exposed, what's the protocol? And those things need to be written down, and we put together the guidance for schools. There are some things that we will generally provide guidance to schools around, and then there will be a team at each school then that needs to start to really say, okay, how does that play out for us? Because every building is different. One example to help everybody get their head around what that might mean is, you know, if we're saying, okay, so we're ready to open secondary schools, and maybe a Hale or a Central has decided, well, in order to kind of reduce the load on teachers and kids, we don't want them taking all of the courses at once, and it reduces transitions to go to a block schedule. Now, that changes teaching, so it's some more learning for teachers, but it does reduce the number of interactions in a school. So that's just an example of how this kind of cascades from the planning committee, the return to school committee, to the work teams, to the schools to figure out. And then these are just a little bit of the notes from the work team. So these are new for the board. So for example, leadership and learning work team, that's obviously Deidre's. So the big chunks that they said we got to really map out is how do we ensure academic progress? Like I mentioned, social emotional learning, support for teachers, which is I think very different in this environment. And then one of the things, so sorry, Deidre's texting me about something I forgot. So that the committee asked us to consider. Yes, I will touch on that, Deidre. One of the things we thought, no matter what we do, and this came out of the work team, is we probably should host at the beginning of the school year a 6th and 9th grade kind of new student orientation in the building. It's one of those rituals that, you know, 6th and 9th graders both look forward to and are very nervous about. They dread the, you know, first time I have to meet all the, you know, the new kids at my new school. I have to figure out how to work my locker. I have to like walk around like where my classes would be when I do get to come back. And so it is just one of those kind of familiar rituals that we thought if we can weave some of those things back in, we think that's advisable. What Deidre shared is on the, with the poll, I was going to drop that into that slide when we talked earlier today, so I apologize to the team. With the poll, we also asked, given kind of MPS's announcement was out and now Shorewood is starting all virtual, we did ask the returning to school committee, do you think given kind of the dynamics of, you know, Wisconsin is surging and other districts are starting virtual only, should we start virtual only? It was a yes or no question. And that one was 64% of the committee felt we should start virtual only. So it's a majority of the committee, but it's not nearly as supportive as the 97% for hybrid option 3. So it is a question that may come back to the board next Monday. With any of these plans, should we start all virtual and then look at the end of September? Are we ready now to bring elementary in? And then at the end of October, are we ready to bring secondary in? So real quick, human resources and employee work team. So, you know, there's all kinds of new guidance around FMLA. There's questions about, you know, what are the procedures for hand washing and class size and all those kind of things that they'll work through. And one of their other thoughts is, you know, do we go back to half day for 4K, 5K? That, you know, negatively impacts membership count. But it is also clear in our current registration trends for 4K, 5K, and in other districts that we're low compared to where we would normally be at this time of year. And it may be that there's kind of two assumptions we're making here. It may be that parents with younger kids are more fearful of returning kids to school, so they're not registering and they're just going to keep their kids home, or they're waiting for us to share what our plan is, and then they'll make that determination. The operations I've already talked about. The first two big things are, you know, food service and transportation. It's likely that and a lot of districts and superintendents are talking about this, is, you know, probably kids go classroom by classroom, they go pick up meals, they go back to their classroom to eat. Phil and Wauwatosa talked about for secondary schools, in order to socially distance, we're going to run normal lunch hour, but kind of stagger how kids get in line, and then kids can eat anywhere they want as long as they keep 6 feet away from each other. So it means kids eating in stairwells potentially, but it is an idea that, you know, secondary kids should be able to manage and socially distance. And we've talked a bunch already today about transportation and all the things that, you know, need to be considered. We are doing, and right now I asked Steve Eichmann to do an inventory on the current PPE we have in stock or expect to have come from the state of Wisconsin, just so we get kind of, okay, here's the current state of the various masks, face shields, hand sanitizer, cleaning equipment that we have in stock. And then the out of school work time team, this is before and after school, so Shelley Strasser is leading this, but this also has all of the after school programming, so extracurriculars, high school athletics, those kind of things, the Action 300, 330 program. So that team will define those. Noted under athletics, we're waiting for communication from WIAA. And there was a WASDA survey that went over the weekend that I responded to today, asking about preferences around fall sports. And the options were fall sports as usual, or move fall sports to spring and spring sports to summer. And that's where we landed at this point. And part of a huge statewide Zoom meeting last week with WIAA and superintendents and athletic directors and high school principals all across the state. And the general consensus I picked up from that is high school and fall sports, high school fall sports, and in particular football, is probably unrealistic. Many districts are expecting secondary students to wear masks at school, and it's a really difficult message to explain to teenagers that you have to wear a mask during the school day, but the football players get to go practice and play football after school, and we don't social distance, we don't worry about masks, and it creates a conflict. And so the general consensus was move fall sports for now. The last piece around health and safety is really the symptom monitoring. And you know, there's been a lot of media images that we see about, you know, checking everybody coming into an airport or coming into a business with their temperature, and that's no longer guidance that we're getting from our health departments. It is not a reliable, predictable symptom, and fever can be symptomatic of so many other things that children encounter. So it's more the self-screening through a survey tool is probably where most districts are going to land. And so this team is looking at those kind of programs or apps. And again, I've mentioned the idea of isolation rooms, special education students, and then the communication component. So we're at final thoughts. That's just kind of a summary statement that I created for the committee. But what I'm trying to do is find us back on hybrid 3, and then we'll start kind of the conversation with questions, thoughts from the board. And again, what we're trying to do is just get a general sense of direction. If I kind of assume that the board supports this general sense of direction and starting school a week late, it would take at minimum board action to change the school calendar. What I'll say up front about that is we're assuming, and it's generally assumed among school districts, that there will again be a waiver of hours of instruction. But if that doesn't come to pass and we've now taken 4 days of instruction out, so we've reduced our hours, we do have a couple snow days built in already. And so we could adapt and hopefully not have any snow days. Or we could add minutes. This would mean by starting on September 8th, it's really 4 days because one of the days is Labor Day. So we need to make up 4 days, which you can do pretty quickly by adding just, you know, 4 or 5 minutes to the end of each day throughout the year. So that's kind of where we are at this point. Heather and Stephanie and I will have more conversation this week about we're trying to kind of go through board policy. What other parts of the plan or the entire plan, hoping hybrid option 3, does the board need to approve? And we don't know the answer to that set of questions just yet, but we're in the phase of our planning process that to engage the board, I think now with your questions is really important and will add value to the entire big committee as we continue to work on this. So
Mark, can I just add one quick thing to that we have also talked to Shelley about perhaps running a camp during that first week, as we're getting on short notice on families to be able to find care for that first week that they anticipated we potentially could be in session. So if we were to delay the start of the school year, Shelley is fully aware that and planning for, if that were the case, that there would be an available camp through rec for families that did need care during that week. And they've had good success in running their camps this summer in very socially distanced and safe and appropriate ways.
Okay, so I stopped sharing my screen. Hopefully that's okay. I can pop it back up if people need to see that slide again. So, thoughts, questions from the board?
Noah?
I have a few questions. Number one, regarding the possible camp, would we be limiting people who could attend it? How would we be doing social distancing in such a camp? Those are the concerns I would have for any of those sorts of situations. I wouldn't be able to run like normal. So would we be splitting over multiple buildings, things like that?
Yeah, I saw Shelley in the room with us, so she can jump in here. But the answer is yes. I think we would run our plan by the West Dallas Health Department, like we did for the current summer day camps, which have limits in numbers, but we don't even there. We didn't end up with a waiting list for the summer camps, and so they're learning to practice with smaller groups and social distancing as much as possible and more hand sanitizing. So I think we would implement similar practices and probably try for every building. But again, we'd run it by the health department to make sure that they support whatever plan we have for those 4 days. So Shelley, if you want to add anything, jump in.
Okay.
Okay.
I presume that there's nothing more to add, which is
Yep.
fine. Thank you. The other thing is regarding to these options we have, and one which received 97% of the committee's support, which is hybrid 3. Is that indicative that full in-person school and full virtual school is now not being considered?
So full in-person, no. I don't think that it allows us to provide, well, both of them no, except for the idea that maybe we start all virtual for the first month, just the dynamics of what's happening with the surge in Wisconsin, maybe something that makes sense to us, and it does allow us a little more time to have teachers adapt to the learning management system, those kind of things. But either all one or all the other, I feel doesn't adequately meet what parents are expressing they need and what teachers are expressing they need. So again, we're trying to find the reason for a hybrid is to try to find a thoughtful kind of balance that allows us to meet as many needs as possible, knowing that none of them are perfect. And this is something I didn't say as I did the introduction. There's no way to get this to be perfect for everybody. And so no matter which direction we head, we're going to have people that are very supportive and people that are very not supportive and maybe even angry at us for the direction we've set. That's just part of the reality of having to lead into this space. But try to be thoughtful and find a reasonable balance is what we're aiming for. At least that's what I'm encouraging the committee to work towards.
Okay. I'm encouraged to hear that virtual could be considered for the first month. The last question I had right now anyways, was regarding mental health services. So looking at hybrid 3, if it was passed, we'd be having a lot of students, secondary students that would be not in school. And was wondering if there was any thought given to providing, with everything that's happened and everything that's continuing to go on, mental health services to those that might need it, either via virtual Zoom meetings or having opportunities to have appointments or whatnot at various buildings in the district for those who would need to have those services.
Yep.
Want me to jump in on that one, Marty? Yeah. So I actually spoke to a rep from St. A's today, and we've had several meetings with PSG, who's our other school service provider for our mental health needs for students. And they both were able to see students virtually over the summer and over the spring. So that works well. We still were able to refer. They started meeting in parks and in open spaces for a while. I think that's scaled back with the shift of the numbers right now. For a while this summer, they have their own each one, like we talked about with the bus company and other places, every organization obviously has their own phase out rules on what they are allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do. So they would absolutely be able to continue seeing students if we came to the agreement that if they had a family who really needed to be seen at a school this summer, we would take those as case-by-case exceptions and then notify facilities that one student and a therapist would be coming into a school so that we could do their proper sanitizing. And we haven't had the need for that yet. I also spoke to St. A's today, and they have a communication out to PSG to see if they would also be willing to start seeing staff through insurance and those kinds of things, as well as much as I know the mental health needs of our students are concerning at the present moment, to say the least. So are they with our staff. This has been a really rough year on all of us. And so we want to provide as much support we can for mental health needs for both staff and for students. And so the potential that a staff member would be able to see a therapist from one of those organizations, again, through insurance, would be possible, potentially with one of them. And then the other one, I'm still working on the communication.
Will that also go for our own psychologists and counselors and social workers as well?
Yep, they continue to see students throughout the spring. They've continued to see students all summer. Our therapist, Dennis Wolf, who's worked with us for many years, continued to see students virtually. And also kept for the first time ever, Dennis doesn't normally see students in the summer, but he continued seeing some students in the summer that he was worried about, and he got permission to do so. And Jeff put in the chat as well, we also have Impact, which is our employee assistance program that quite a few of our staff do access and utilize. And Mike from Impact's always very helpful to us whenever we have a situation at a school that we feel needs more intensive wraparound to help the school process.
I lied. I had a couple more questions. Just to reiterate, the special ed students that need services regardless of age, those would be included in the hybrid 3 option for those to be in person if necessary?
Yes, they have to be. We're required to meet the expectations of IEPs. But there are some students that we think would benefit tremendously by being back in schools. And trying to identify that population of kids. And again, it's consistent with what's showing up in the educational literature. If you're starting schools slow, I mean, there's an article that's linked in the big planning document that the board has access to that it's titled the least option.
The least worst option, yes.
Start with elementary, and they also talk about start with elementary and your high needs special needs students as the least worst option at this point.
And then we have some of those students who are incredibly medically fragile, and we'll also continue to get really creative with how we do at-home services, and we're investigating teletherapy options. And we've been able to keep up with quite a few of the IEP meetings and those kinds of things. And we'll start a plan next week for a really safe testing center at our administration building to continue to assess students and meet their needs as we unfold the best way to do that safely. And so we've got some new protocols set up and the ability to continue some of that evaluation work around the work of special education needs as well.
Okay. And then lastly, regarding the elementary, looking at in person, would there still be a virtual option for parents who weren't comfortable sending their kids back to in-person school?
So yes, there would still be a virtual option. It's a little bit of the idea of the whole hybrid. How do we do all 3 at once? So elementary families would have the option of 5 days face-to-face, or you could be a 2-day student. So you come 2 days a week face-to-face, 3 days virtual, or you could be an all virtual student. And I didn't mention working through this, and what we've talked about is there is a mechanism through Skyward where we're going to ask families to sign up your kids. So Jeff Borland and Aaron Norris are working on that, and that we would probably set the expectation of you're committed to that then for a quarter. And so if you pick virtual, you need to be virtual for the whole quarter. And then if you feel more comfortable or your family circumstances change, you need your child back in the school 5 days, then we'll open it up to say, okay, let's adapt and adjust. And so that would be a quarter semester, quarters. Well, wouldn't be at the end of the year that we want to adjust. But that's a little bit how we've at least envisioned that.
Okay. Thank you. I'll let people ask questions now.
Brian, you had some questions to share?
Yeah, I have a few as well. And I wanted to go back to the three options that were discussed by the committee. It sounds like those were the only three options that were presented to the committee that they could vote on. So I guess some clarity on who developed those different options. If potentially they had an option where they could have voted none of the above. So for instance, if they really preferred a more all virtual option, because I'm curious how those numbers have been skewed, but if you, I have more after that, but.
Yeah, so the hybrid options, I really developed the first iterations of them, and we did it with the directors team on working through what we thought were reasonable things to present. One of the challenges here is you could spin out variations on a theme forever and ever and ever, and we're going to spend the next 4 weeks spinning our wheels and we end up with no direction at all. And that can't be the solution. So somebody has to set some direction, and we're in that kind of mode of leading right now, is that the requirement of me is that it's my job to set some direction. And even though, you know, I prefer really taking the time to build consensus and consider all the variables, we don't have the luxury of allowing for that right now. And I've shared that with, you know, Stephanie and Heather, that there is a place for directive leadership at times, and this is probably one of them. So I'll claim that I narrowed it that there's going to be three options, and we got to get some direction going. So what was the second part of your question, Brian?
Just if they were allowed to vote for instance, if none of the above, basically.
Yeah, we didn't provide a none of the above option, which is an interesting thought. We did ask that one question, you know, would you support all virtual to start the year? And again, that was, what was it, Deidre, 63 or 67%? You know?
I think it was 64.
64%, so 63 point something. So the majority of the committee did support starting virtual only, which I'm not opposed to. I actually think it probably makes some sense, as long as we're able to really define metrics of how we shift then to the next phase and the next phase, because I think there'll be a lot of elementary only parents in particular that won't like that option. But if we can say, okay, if it looks like this at the end of September, then you know, 1 week later you can start sending your little one to school on Monday.
Mm-hmm.
And I think from a communication standpoint, to have some really concrete metrics will then help alleviate, you know, the fact that I got to figure out, you know, supervising my kid learning online for another month.
So want to focus on those 5-day, a few questions regarding the 5-day in-person elementary school situation. So in a couple of the models, and I think even with the intermediate students, there was that extra day for cleaning. If we have students in person all 5 days, how is that going to be accommodated at the elementary school level?
Yep. So it's a good question. So the thinking around that is based on kind of where the science is around younger kids and disease transmission. And, you know, there's a recent study that, you know, it's 10-year-olds are now kind of grouped with the younger adults in terms of the way they seem to transmit or are impacted by the virus. That right now the science suggests that that's less so among elementary kids. And so that's really the logic of having elementary kids in 5 days a week, because there's less likelihood of having severe symptoms of COVID-19 and of transmitting it to others. And it's the balance between that reality and honoring what, you know, elementary only parents have said is they need 5 days. So that's really the thinking behind the 5 days in elementary. And then the opposite is older kids seem to transmit it more and are more susceptible to more difficult outcomes. So that's why the extra day of not only it's for cleaning, but also the work day for teachers that are teaching across, you know, in person, 2-day in person, and all virtual. So that's really the kind of logic, at least in my mind, that fits with that part of the hybrid model.
So the teachers who have, or I guess stepping back, so students have potentially these 3 different options in terms of 5 days a week, 2 days a week, or all virtual. Will teachers be required to teach all three of those different scenarios? Will they have kids that are virtual as well as those that are in person?
So some, yes. And the way we're envisioning this right now, and there may be other ways to solve the problem, in particular secondary. So secondary, the answer is yes. That
Mhm.
secondary, so it's grades 6 through 12, and this is really related to certifications of teachers in specific content areas, and science is always the big challenge, right? Because it's not only you have to be certified to be a science teacher, but you have to be certified to be a chemistry teacher or a biology teacher. And so you have less flexibility. So at secondary, we're asking teachers to teach their 4-day-a-week kids, right? Because they'd have Wednesdays as a work day. So they're 4-day-a-week kids, then they're 2-day-a-week kids that come and go, and then they're virtual kids. And what we're trying to do is figure out if there's a technology solution that allows more of a broadcast mode. So out of a classroom where there are a lot of virtual kids, can we also just do live broadcasts? So again, if I'm the US history teacher, I have my first hour kids in front of me, but maybe only 12 signed up for in-person, and the other majority of my kids are all virtual, so they can then log in on a learning management system and see the lesson taking place and participate that way. So that's one of the solutions. For elementary, what we're envisioning, and again, it's going to depend on the choices parents make by kid, by school. But what we envision could play out is that there would be a separate cohort of elementary teachers that have all of the virtual students. So essentially, we set up a quasi-virtual elementary school. What I like about that is then elementary teachers that we're asking, you need to teach 5 days a week because that's what parents have asked for. They don't have virtual kids to work with. So there's a whole cohort of teachers. The downside, what we don't like about it, is the virtual teachers may or may not be from their home school. Right? So that there's no way to promise that, that you're going to see the teachers that you used to see in your school. Depending again on the choices parents make by kid, by school, for what they want, in-person, 2-day, or virtual, we may be able to launch a cohort of teachers that have just the distance learning kids, meaning the 2-day kids. So that reduces the number of kids that are coming and going from any elementary school. So that's good for social distancing, and it reduces the complexity of what we're asking elementary teachers to do. But we don't see the same kind of solution, at least at this point, for secondary.
And Marty, if I can just add one thing to that, I think that's the part of the idea behind the request to consider pushing school back a whole week is also to get teachers up and going with what they need in each one of those settings in order to be able to do that. And the idea would be that the learning management system would allow us to frame all the learning as if it was virtual and then flex back and forth for students that are in front of us during the day. It allows for recording for students who need asynchronous learning, because we have some students who just for whom their family situation, the learning happens at night, and that's just easier for them, or when that can happen. And so the goal is to have a base for teachers to work off of that is really easy for families and puts all the learning in all one place. And then that way it also allows us some flexibility as students are changing their mode of learning throughout the school year, or if we should need to do rolling closures or things like that. It just allows us the time with the teachers to really kind of hone in on what they need to do. And that's certainly something that's come back. And a lot of the communication from our teachers is that they did unbelievably well at distance learning in the spring, at emergency remote teaching, whatever you want to call it. But they've all said pretty consistently, if you just gave me some more time to plan, I could do that so much better, and I'd feel more confident in what I was doing. So that's some of where that request is coming from as well, is to give the teachers time to get set up with each of their different options that they're trying to meet the needs of kids.
Right.
Brian, did you have a couple more questions?
2 follow-ups to that specific thing, and then I'll let somebody else talk. So in that case where we don't have teachers that can handle those 2-day-a-week students, are we concerned about the I guess the workload on the teachers that might have those 2-day-a-week students as well as their in-person class. Because I know some teachers that were working till late at night responding to students and helping them with things like that. And I think that's an awful large ask for some of our teachers. And I think from the other perspective, we said we can make these adjustments every quarter depending on what's going on and the comfort level of families. What's the communication going to be between the virtual teachers and those in-person teachers to know that where the teaching was and how that matches up now that they might be going back into that classroom environment to make sure that they're on the same page?
So Deidre, you can take the second part of the question. So the first part was, Brian and everyone, are we concerned about, the workload expectations on teachers? Absolutely. Absolutely, and to try to find a way to balance all of that. And so, the secondary solution is 1 day a week, which is, I think, a reasonable way to try to balance it, even though that we're really expecting a lot of secondary teachers. For elementary, remember that we do have 3 additional kind of work planning days already built in the calendar for elementary schools. And part of what is sort of in consideration is, do we add additional kind of work day planning days for elementary, but in a way that's a little bit easier for parents to manage? So not every Wednesday, because then it interrupts a whole work week every single week. Maybe at the end of a quarter, there's 2 days or 3 days if we look at where those current 3 days land as a way to help, so parents know that, oh, the last week of the quarter, I have my kids home for 3 days in a row. So that's a way we're considering trying to find a way to balance that. But yeah, we're concerned about everybody's workload through this because it's, the unknowns are as they are, they're going to pop up and we have to adjust. But we're asking a lot of everyone in all of this. And again, we're trying to be thoughtful and find a reasonable way to balance it. And then you want to take the second part?
Yeah, Brian, that's exactly why we want the learning management system, why we're proposing one, is so that the learning, again, gets managed in the one place. And when we go into the second workshop tonight, I'll be able to show you some screenshots of what that looks like, but it allows there to be a substitute that can come in quite easily should, God forbid, a teacher gets ill or they're caring for a family member that's ill. It just allows there to be some more continuity between the plan so that as we need to step in throughout the year, as we need to make adjustments, there's just a better tracking system for that. There's a better management system for that than what we've had, where we had teachers absolutely going to the nth degree all spring, putting together a lot of resources and making sure it was comprehensive and rigorous for them. But there's more efficient ways for us to do that with providing them some additional tools. And so that's what we're hoping to do by proposing a learning management system.
Thank you. Kristen, you had some questions?
Yeah, hi. For those of you who are here in the meeting who don't know me, I am a new member. I'm also a teacher myself, though, and I have children in the district, so I feel like I have a little bit of a middle ground that some people may not be thinking about. I have 2 to 3 questions, depending on where we get with answers here. One is, none of the scenarios addressed infection rates. When we closed schools to begin with, and I know that was a state issue, but when we closed schools initially, we had a far lower infection rate. And Marty, you brought up it infecting more 20-year-olds right now. Well, we're a young district because we are seen as a district to get your foothold in and then move on. My grave concern is, what's that threshold infection number going to be for us to then say, oh, we all have to go back to virtual again? Mm-hmm. That's my first question.
Yep. So I don't know the answer to that. That is something that is on the list with the health departments to talk about tomorrow. What are the metrics that are going to, that they would use to say schools need to close entirely? And I agree. And it's an odd place we're in, is that what caused the state to close schools in the first place, the conditions of, disease transmission were far less than they are right now, which makes me wonder why they're not just making a statewide directive that would help us all to say, for till the end of September, everything is virtual. That would make our lives much clearer, not easier or simpler, but clearer. And so we've got to follow some guidance from the health departments. And so we're going to talk about that for the first time tomorrow. And again, I'm not going to try to listen to all 4 of them and calibrate. I'm going to then just kind of get them talking to each other and help them understand that, okay, where West Dallas goes is where we're going to go.
All right. Another question, I guess, and you can address the health department on is then, what's our threshold number going to be for, let's say, one classroom gets shut down because someone gets sick? What if the whole family gets sick? How many classrooms then shut down? Do you shut down the whole school? What if it's a recurring situation with the one family? My biggest concern is that families like mine that have been home for 107 days or whatever it is now, what about those who've been safest? And the families are going to come in and get people sick because they just are not as stringent about it. What are we going to do in that situation?
Mm-hmm. And so the way I understand it is going to be really based on health department determinations after contact tracing. And so we will have requirements of when we get either reports through a family, through an employee of, you know, a positive test result in a home or exposure through an interaction in the public, that we would go into an isolation mode. So that's part of the health and safety work team, is to define what does that mean. And then write up a protocol that schools have to handle, and principals are already working through, like, okay, where's the isolation room going to be? Because if you think about elementary health rooms, they're usually attached to the office. That's not going to be a good place to isolate somebody. And so some of those protocols are being designed, but again, it's going to be based on contact tracing and what the health department finds in terms of, then they're going to direct us to say that classroom has to be closed, or that part of the building has to be closed. Or an example that we were working through is, let's say a principal has somebody in their household that tests positive. The contact tracing says, okay, that principal met without masks with the leadership team. Now that whole leadership team is told by the health department, you have to quarantine for 2 weeks. So we're anticipating having, and this is in Jeff Thompson's area, what we're calling the B team. So an administrative team that can come in, a whole team that can come in and keep the school running if it's the administrative team that is told that it has to quarantine. But again, those are going to be directives from the local health department. One of the complexities for us, even though I'm saying I'm relying more heavily on the guidance from the West Dallas Health Department in terms of contact tracing, it's going to be all 4 of them that we're going to be responding to, because they have jurisdiction in their communities and where our schools are part of their communities. So it's a long, complicated way to answer that.
Yeah, and my third question is actually for Jeff Thompson. Our teachers, I'm not sure if it's under the CARES Act or whatever it is called for employees, but I know there are teachers that are going to be younger teachers that haven't accumulated sick days, or how is that going to happen if, let's say, a teacher gets sick? We're now seeing that, you know, we are seeing that people get sick, and it's not 2 weeks they're sick, it's 6 to 8 weeks or longer with recurring concerns. And that's a real situation. I'm wondering what their that leeway is for teachers concerning sick days. Is it, can all staff start on FMLA for children, if, you know, or for other family members? I'm just wondering how that's being addressed.
Yeah, so this is something that we're working closely with Melissa Cherney and Claire Hartley, the attorney that I work with as well. But there's a lot of new laws that are out there in regards to paid sick leave for employees, whether it's full pay for up to 80 hours, or it could be a certain number of weeks at a rate 2/3 of pay. And so we take the situations case by case, working through the appropriate documentation and applying some of those new laws in regards to the impact of COVID to assist our employees.
The CARES Act has something related specifically to family leave and things like that too. So that would be in effect as well, right, Jeff?
Yes.
Heather, did you have some questions too? I'm sorry, Kristen, do you want me to move on, or do you have more follow-up questions?
No, I'm set. Thank you, dear.
I'm sure we can come back around, but Heather, I know you had your hand up too.
Yeah. So a couple of questions. when we talk about the 5-day plan of the kids coming back 5 days a week, how are we planning for what if every single student wants to come back? How are we going to accommodate the social distancing, smaller classroom sizes? I mean, that's going to be a huge concern. I mean, it could happen where every single elementary school student comes back. How do we accommodate?
Yep, it's a good question and one that scares me to think about. We have proposed it. It's the opposite of the Madison example I gave, right? So we have very few kids that want to come back. Well, what if one of the elementary schools, almost all the kids want to come back? I think we're going to have to approach that when we see the data, if that actually plays out. I mean, the high level data tells us, 50 to 60% of elementary kids are probably coming back. So some of what we may have to consider if we get this weird anomaly in the way the distribution happens of kids based on parent choices, do we start changing kids' school assignments, temporarily while we work through all of this? I mean, that is an option. Do we, an option is we reach back to parents and say we want to try to honor social distancing as much as possible. We need, X number of you to volunteer to go to 2-day a week, or another option is we simply do a lottery that says we can't accommodate all of you. So we're going to do a lottery and say some of you are going to go to 2-day a week. So there are ways that we can respond to it, but until we actually see the distribution, to have a concrete direction is unknown.
Okay. Second question, if we go to the all virtual for that first month and say the rec does the daycare or programming, are we going to make sure they have devices or that the devices are available so that the kids can do the online learning during that day camp time so that the parents aren't then tasked with doing it in the evening?
Yep, so it's an interesting question. We actually talked about it today. And so we assume that the day camp would still be limited in terms of the numbers of kids we would facilitate. Maybe there's a morning session, an afternoon session to provide parents with more coverage. But I think one of the criticisms of that particular approach is that if you're going to give kids devices to learn during day camp, we'll just open the school. So I see that as an obvious one for parents to bring up. But I think we'd want to offer, and again, given kind of where we are in the surge in Wisconsin, it probably does make sense that we start all virtual. But offer some support to families so that part of the day that, kids can be, at least elementary kids, have a place where they could be, and maybe we figure out the access to devices on a kind of as needed basis.
Okay, I have two more. The other one is special ed. Going back to the special ed, a lot of our teachers' aides have a lot more close contact with our special ed kids because of their physical, social, emotional needs. How, I guess that's a huge, what do we do kind of thing. I'm sure a lot of those special ed kids are not going to leave masks on, things like that. How do we protect our staff in those instances?
Yep, Deidre, you can go ahead with that one.
Okay. So yeah, Heather, that's a huge concern for us. Obviously, the personal cares that go into meeting the needs of some of our learners with really intense special ed needs, that's a concern for us. So Ann Locke is going to a regional meeting tomorrow to start asking other districts and that's the purpose of the meeting tomorrow, is to communicate with other districts and ask some of those questions on what other districts are doing as far as that goes. We will obviously need to provide some additional supports in those spaces, because in order to keep the students socially distanced, you're going to need more support in those spaces. And so those are all factors that we're thinking about and considering right now. It would mean that a team of teachers who actually do that work and some of the educational assistants would have the opportunity to get together and say, hey, here's the plan we think would actually work for the learners that we serve. Because they don't work in those classrooms every day. So some parts of that are really hard for me to be able to say, oh, this student has these needs, and therefore this would be the support that we would need in order to keep ourselves safe, as well as maintain the best social distancing that we can within the space that we're allotted and within the space that we have. So all huge considerations. And so there's a lot of information going around right now in the region and across the nation on how to do some of that as safely as possible. And that's what we're collecting at the present moment. And then if that's part of the approved plan, then we're going to have to sit down and buckle down and say, okay, what resources do we need to make this happen? And part of what we've shared with Caitlin for when it comes to our students with special needs, we know that we have to dedicate some of the CARES dollars that we've been allocated towards figuring that piece of the work out, because we have testing that has to happen through the summer. That's additional time for staff. We have additional needs in some of those classrooms should we be open face-to-face, that just we don't have right now. And so that's all part of that consideration and why we've allocated some additional dollars of that money specifically to trying to figure pieces of that out.
And then finally, just the virtual, and you had touched a little bit on it about having them go during school hours to the virtual. You talked more about the secondary versus elementary. I know that the colleges do that. Like in the summer, they had freedom. You could do it on your own time. But like during the week, they had to be online during their normal scheduled class time. And that's what you said. We're looking into doing that, how we can configure that so that the kids can still be at home, but then they're still like in their classroom virtually. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes, that is something we're hoping to offer some very different kinds of solutions. There's some technology and it gets to be pricey, but there's a device called Swivel that you put an iPad in, and it you teach it to follow the teacher around the room. It's like a little robot that rolls around the room and keeps the camera on the teacher. That's about $1,000 a classroom, and so we think for some classrooms in secondary where there's a higher percentage of virtual kids, we might want to deploy that kind of technology. But creating the expectations, and it can also be done through Zoom, and Deidre has done this teaching at the college level. There were certain students that had come in through Zoom, and then you assign a device to one of the face-to-face students, and their job is to make sure that the student that's virtual, you know, has an advocate in the room. Like if I'm the virtual kid and I have a question, there's somebody that will like monitor me on the screen when I'm raising my hand and say, well, Deidre, Marty has a question. So that's another way to facilitate it. We like the idea. And the learning management system also helps kind of coordinate underneath all of this. But what I like about the idea of kind of synchronous virtual learning is that it does create a little bit more normalcy for secondary kids, that they go from first hour to second hour to third hour, so that if we are shifting back and forth between quarter to quarter by what parents need or by what health departments require of us, to have that kind of routine built in, I think is helpful. There won't be a perfect solution to it. And like Deidre said, some families, it works better when they're, kids are catching up and they're virtual learning at night. But that is part of the thinking of the way we'd like to see this organized. The other reason, the last reason why we think that is helpful is we anticipate that there will be teachers that are told you have to go quarantine for 2 weeks. And it may just because there was an exposure somewhere in a contact trace out in public or in their family. But they may be have no symptoms. They may not test positive, but they still have to quarantine for 2 weeks. Well, they can keep teaching, right? They don't need to take sick time. They can then log in from home, and if they know that their first hour, all kids are meeting during first hour, that helps.
And then utilizing, like Marty said, recordings and other pieces for students that the asynchronous is the piece that worked for them in the spring, or the students that are maybe watching some of the elementary kids during the day if we're all virtual, and therefore they need the capacity to be able to review the videos or review the things in an asynchronous way to really meet their needs. So it's really trying to find a balance and a blend, and that's some of why the extra teacher planning time is so important, because to do this well and to make sure that we're meeting the needs of all of the kids, it's asking a lot of people, and so we need to make sure that we're balancing that as best we can as well.
Thank you.
Christine, you had some questions?
Yes, I did. I just want to say thanks and appreciation to everyone who served on the committee. Normally when things are presented, a lot of times questions are answered. And one of the things that I had kind of first off, and then both Dr. Lexman touched on it on one end of the spectrum, and then Heather touched it on completely the other, brings up the question of when is the communication with regard to elementary schools going to be communicated to parents, along with the possibility that, you know, if there's a short number and we can't actually open your kid's neighborhood school, but could possibly send them to a different school, when would that be sent out to parents, and when would they have to, when's the cutoff date for the commitment to the quarter?
So we're working through some of those pieces now. We're hoping to get the sign up communication out this week. So that's probably something we need to run for a number of days. But we've built a plan, and this is Beth is working with Jeff and Aaron, where we will within a matter of a couple of days start doing follow-up phone calls from the school because we need the information but be able to plan on, and we need it as quickly as possible. So phone calls to parents that haven't responded is going to be the follow-up mechanism, and to say you need to make a choice. And then we're going to communicate it as quickly as possible based on how the data comes back and the distributions shows up as quickly as possible. Start making the decisions about, do we need to move some kids around? Do we need to change the school to a distance learning school? It does need to move fast because parents need to make a plan. I mean, part of what we'll bring back next week, once Stephanie and Heather and I figure out what are the pieces the board really needs to decide upon, and that's going to set kind of a lot of direction as well. I mean, if we're going to ask the board next week, if our final recommendation is hybrid 3, but we start all virtual, well, we need the board to decide next week. It can't be that the board says, well, we need more information, we need another workshop, and then we'll decide 2 weeks from now. We don't have that kind of time. And I hate to kind of put that pressure on the board, but also it's my responsibility to be realistic as we move through all of this. So
Well, and it helps us too to have a roadmap, because there are often times where you have workshops and there's like, oh, I have a question. And it's nice to know that we have at least a week to be able to email those questions and get answers and clarification.
Yep.
Christy, did you have more follow-up questions?
I do not, thank you.
Okay.
Chris,
I think Gary and then Kristen.
so I just clarification. Under option 3, are we including special needs students for classroom learning for all grades?
Yes. Right. So when we bring back, we start all virtual, and then when we bring back any in-person kids, and we would start with elementary, we would bring back the highest needs special education students at all grades.
Okay. And then, so I guess related, if we decide to go all virtual for the first month or go all virtual at some time during the school year, will we make an exception for special needs students, and would that exception cover all grade levels?
Well, that's a good question. We haven't thought about that particular scenario, and I kind of like the idea of it in 2 fronts. One, it's better for some of the students with special needs that they get back into school and back with us. And it also, on a smaller scale, helps us to try on in-person school, where we're trying to do screenings and mitigation and isolation. And so maybe we don't have as many incidents as of that right away to respond to. So on a couple of fronts, it's probably a good idea. So we're going to kind of put that one in the plan.
Okay. And then another question related to going all virtual. What about students who come from families where economic conditions require them to work? So they're not a special needs student, but they're in a special circumstance due to economic conditions.
Yeah, so I think the best we can do is the opportunity through recreation, so some kind of day camp experience where they have some supervision. And I think we'd have to figure out based on how many families say, well, I would sign my student up for that. Is that then, do we have just half day opportunity, or can we offer full day? So I think that's really the solution that, and Shelley's already kind of working on what that might look like if she has to do that for a month. Yeah, and we'd also have staff that we could deploy from the school side to the rec side, especially our educational assistants. So that could help in supervising groups of students during that kind of camp experience while we're virtual.
Okay, and then I have one more question related to athletics. I read an article about the WIAA, how they're going to look at risk assessments throughout the state to determine how they might handle athletics. They're also talking about possibly adjusting conferences. Would those athletic decisions, do you envision those being handled by the WIAA at the state level, or are they going to hand something off to the schools and the conferences and say, try to figure this out on your own?
So I very much hope they don't hand it off. In the big statewide call I was on last week, WIAA got a great deal of pushback from many superintendents across the state that it needs to be a statewide decision. And the logic of it is if they try to offer any kind of tournament experience at all, it has to be statewide. Otherwise, you have uneven kind of experiences for kids. If and even if WIAA, let's say for example, they say, yeah, we're gonna run fall sports, we're gonna run football as we normally do, we're gonna have all the tournaments as we normally do. Well, what happens to the schools that are shut down and quarantined for 2 weeks and they missed games and they missed practice? So now we have, again, it's inherently unequal for athletics. So outside of, our two high schools, maybe, if they say, figure it out on your own, well, then maybe we have our two high schools play one game with each other and that's the end of it. Again, like I said earlier, what, from advice from our athletic directors was our preference is move all of fall sports to spring sports to summer. And that way we have time to figure this out and hopefully things improve enough where we can still have kids engaged in athletics, but we're just going to be delayed.
And then just to one quick follow-up to that. In that same article, the WIA said they were putting athletics into different groups, low risk, high risk, and low risk, medium risk, and high risk. Have those discussions come up with them?
Not in any discussions I've been in at this point.
Okay.
So I get the idea of it, like cross country, you could probably space kids out on.
Yeah, they, sports like football, wrestling, they named a few others were high risk. Cross country, some track and field events were identified as low risk. Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary. Kristen, before I come back to you, I have a couple questions real quick, and then we'll kind of circle back around. Marty, with regards to the elementary, offering the options, all three options potentially for families, what kinds of options are the staff going to have? Do they get to choose their preferred method? I want to be an in-person teacher. I want to be a hybrid. I want to be a virtual only. And then what happens if we can't accommodate that?
Yeah, so this is one of the real delicate kind of spaces for us. We can't give employees the same set of choices that we're giving parents, because it's just not going to line up. It's not going to match, and even the very kind of high level data tells us that. I think where we begin is as we're asking the question of families, which one are you going to sign up for the first quarter? The question that we're going to have to put out to employees is, if you have an underlying medical condition that your doctor says prevents you from coming face-to-face, you need to get that letter on file now. And that'll allow us to start figuring out what kind of accommodations beyond FMLA we may need to make. I want to be as accommodating as possible, but if we get to a place where we say we're going to have now add in-person school, we're going to have to be able to staff it. And that's going to mean I have to tell certain people, you have to come to work because that's your job. And that's what, and Jeff Thompson said earlier, that's why we're spending a lot of dollars with Claire Hartley to get the legal advice of how to navigate that. And it is part of the reality that, in order to get schools back open, we need teachers in particular to step up and be a part of the solution. But I think we also have to be sensitive, especially to teachers that have underlying health conditions that put them at risk, and try to use those teachers for the more virtual option. And then again, where the data fall out, we're going to have to figure out what kind of adjustments may or may not be needed.
Okay. Kristen, did you have some additional questions?
Yeah, as a teacher, a quick statement based off what you just said, Marty. As a teacher, that just really bothers me how you said that, because I didn't get into teaching to become a health liability. So I'm just putting that out there. My question is, though, what liability is the school district going to be is there going to be a liability on us? Let's say we say elementary school masks are recommended, but we don't force it. My child gets sick because the family doesn't choose to wear masks. What's the liability? And I'm just saying this is going to be something that comes up and has come up by people messaging me.
Yep. So we don't have the detailed answers yet around liability. Caitlin, you may know a little bit more about this in some of the conversations that you're having on the risk management side. But there is, within the next kind of federal package, there's language around liability exemptions, liability waivers that help cover some of these things. It's also, that same question appears in a list of questions we received from the Teachers Association. And it wasn't just our teacher association, it was kind of a combination of kind of the common questions that are surfacing across all of the teacher associations in our region. And so that's with Jeff Thompson's team. And it really is specific to, am I personally liable as a teacher if some of these things happen? So it's on our radar to address. So we're watching both the federal, what our attorneys and risk management folks advise, and then figuring out, and we're going to build a number of frequently asked questions to help employees and parents have a place to go when they have these kind of questions as well. So Caitlin, I don't know if you have anything more to add at this point.
I don't really have any further details. Like exactly what you said is what I was going to say, that we're still working through it. And this is one of those items, just like many of the items, that cross-reference groups and work teams. So we're working with our risk management, our liability, and then we'll also be working with the HR team and the health and safety team through this one. So no specifics just yet.
Well, I want to follow up my question too. So, Marty, you mentioned for staff that might have, pre-existing conditions or might be immunocompromised or things. What about if their family members or those that they care for are, but they're not personally? Does that put them in a different category? Do they get an exemption for maybe not teaching in person because of that? If they have a child who maybe has diabetes or something that they're, or they're caring for an elderly parent or something like that. Do those factors come in as well with regards to where teachers are assigned or how they're utilized in the school year?
Yes, so that's, Jeff, you may need to jump in on this one, but that, so if you're in a home where there's a family member or somebody that's immunocompromised, that is one of the exemptions, the new exemptions under FMLA. So there is a mechanism that allows us to be responsive to that as much as we can, given the FMLA rules.
Okay.
Yeah.
Noah, you had your hand up too. I'm sorry, Jeff, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, the only thing that I'd add to that, there's a lot of groups that we need to look at. It could be if we have an employee who's pregnant as well. So there's a lot of factors that we need to look at when we do look into that staffing situation.
Okay, thank you. Noah, you had your hand up too?
Yeah, I just had a few other follow-ups. First, regarding the meeting with the other health departments, it may be worthwhile to loop in the Milwaukee Health Department, since we do have families that reside in the city of Milwaukee, and any of that testing would fall underneath their jurisdiction. So it might be worthwhile to open up channels with them, because we very well may need to work with them if we do have an exposure or contact tracing that needs to be done. So that's more of a statement than a question, I guess I'd say. The other thing was regarding testing. So is there any thought to providing testing for staff if there's an exposure, or even to families that maybe have a hard time trying to locate a place to be tested, in the interest of getting an answer sooner rather than later, so that proper contact tracing, so forth and so on, can occur?
So, regarding the Milwaukee Health Department, I mean, the health departments are all talking to each other, and that's not the plan for the meeting tomorrow. And I doubt we could, like, figure out how to get somebody out of any health department right now at short notice. So I've got to trust that they're talking to one another, and it only adds complexity to what I'm trying to navigate with regards to health guidance further. So in terms of on-site testing, it's something we can explore maybe with the wellness center. We certainly are not staffed to have people deployed to do testing. And I don't hear that conversation with other superintendents, but because we have a wellness center, which makes us unique, I can explore that with Zach as an option that maybe kind of speeds up the process. So yeah, we have a resource that maybe makes us a little unique.
And in some instances, maybe we can engage the West Dallas Health Department to see if their public health nurses might be able to assist in certain situations. The testing itself is very simple, so any public health nurse would have the training to do it. So the other question I had was regarding food distribution. So if we're looking at virtual learning for our secondary students, and possibly also elementary students for at least the first month, or if we move into virtual because of what's happening. I know we had food distribution, but I was wondering if there's any thoughts to expanding the locations or anything like that to try to make it easier for some families to be able to access it.
Yep, I can speak to that one. So we're still working through with food service the options that we have. We will be using the guidance that comes out in the programming that comes out from the food service, the state on the state level. Just like they expanded for the summer, the program that allowed all of our families to still eat for free. That will be I believe the case for the coming school year as well for the families who would be virtual. And we certainly can look into the additional locations that we can provide that food service at for those families who are not at school. Yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure. I mean, I know with everything that happened in the spring, it was kind of fly by the seat of our pants for a little while. But now with time to plan, I would like to see an expansion of those locations if possible, just to make it easier, because I know not everyone is able to get to those locations. Sometimes, especially again, if you're dealing with working families and people who are by themselves at home.
And Noah, just to add something quickly to that, when we asked Steve to expand on the number of locations he used in the spring, he pulled the data from where the most frequent pickup for summer meals are, and that's how he decided where to continue adding sites. So Steve Kosner from Sodexo did not have any, he was willing and able to add sites and do things like that, but that's how he did it in the spring, just so people know. As when we said, could you, this seems like too limited of an option, he went to the data that he had, which is where are the most frequent pickups for summer meals. And then that was how he knew where to add locations. So the more information he gets on those kinds of things, the better.
Okay. So for those, if we have to have students who are not going to their neighborhood school because of social distancing needs, who would be responsible for the transportation of those students then from where their neighborhood school would be to wherever they would have to end up going to?
So what I'm anticipating is we would follow the same transportation guidelines that we have in place now. So if that relocation or that reassignment puts a student on, more than 2 miles away from home, then they're eligible for transportation. So that would be consistent in how we use our current eligibility criteria, looking at kind of what the change, the impact of the change of placement does to that compared to that criteria.
Okay. It was brought up about having, if we have a closure where we have to go all virtual because of infection rate increasing in the community, that we may still be opening or allowing those for special needs to continue to do in-person schooling. I would just worry about if the reason why we're shutting schools down is because of an increase in cases, that making that exception even for special needs kids may not be the best option because of the fact that we know it's circulating more. That's why we're shutting down school. But the people that may be even more at risk are now going to be having contact with other people. And that also is a risk for our staff as well. I worry that if we put staff in positions where they have to choose between their health and their job, a lot of times they're going to pick their health. And it's, as you said, we need teachers to open schools. And I don't want to start losing staff because we put them into a difficult situation.
Yeah, so a couple thoughts. So if classrooms are closed or schools are closed, we're not doing that. That's the health department, right? So they make those determinations. That's not on us. And if they close a school, it also means we're not providing services for special needs students because that school is closed. And so those are things that, you know, we're going to have to learn as we hit those moments, right? So it kind of started like, there's no way for us at this point to have a plan that addresses every eventuality because we can't anticipate all of them. And so we got to work forward with some of these realities, and then we'll learn how to adapt and use that experience as we go forward.
Okay, I was referring to your response to Gary's question regarding shutting schools down. So you were saying that if schools are shut down due to increases cases, we wouldn't be offering services to anybody regardless.
Correct. Yeah. What I understood in the question was, if we start all virtual, would we bring special needs students back to schools? And the answer to that is, yeah. I think that's kind of an interesting idea. It assumes there are no orders at that time that tell us certain schools or all schools are closed.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Brian, you had some questions next.
Yeah, I keep going back to kind of the elementary school situation, and especially with the kids that are there kind of regularly. So I guess first question is, you know, since we're providing both, you know, in-person and hybrid, how does that help with the different class sizes and the social distancing? And I guess, especially in terms of the survey, were parents expecting that there could potentially still be full class sizes, even with a hybrid option? And kind of a second part to that, I know, for instance, my son was just in a 5th grade class, and classrooms aren't set up the same way they used to be. You used to have individual desks where it was a little bit easier to move kids around. And now you have these tables where usually you have 4, 5, 6 kids sitting around it. How are we going to be able to accommodate those classrooms to make sure that we are able to social distance accordingly as well?
So one of the steps we've taken at this point is with our facility planning process, we've actually leveraged the relationship with Bray Architects, because they now have all of the up-to-date floor plans of all of the buildings. And they have them all digitally. So it was an interesting exercise, a little bit of a challenge at first, but they can pretty quickly map out all the instructional spaces that could be used and tell us how many kids could be fit socially distanced. And it kind of assumes a desk and a chair. And so the table problem is a little bit different. And I think that's another one where we have to have the data to be able to figure out the solution. So again, we need, you know, parents to make a choice by student, by their child, by school. So we can look at, okay, what are the dynamics of this? We did communicate when we put out the survey. If you look back at kind of how we described in-person, distance, and virtual, in-person assumes limited social distancing available. And I think that's a reality for how schools run. So the example that came up, and I don't know which superintendent shared it, but if you think about, so if you have a group of elementary kids and you figure out how to socially distance 17 kids in a classroom and you take them out in the hallway and say you have to stand in a line 6 feet apart from each other, well, you need 4 adults to manage the line, right? Because they're down the hall and around the corner. And so some of those realities of how schools function with kids in them, I think the reality is it's limited social distancing. We're trying to be honest with parents about that dynamic as we try to figure out what's the solution for us.
Brian, did you have more questions?
Yes. So I guess just clarification for the secondary ages. Are they, I know the plan is that they would start virtually. Are they going to have that option to remain virtually, kind of similar to elementary on a quarterly basis? What's that going to look like?
The answer is yes. Yeah, so there would continue to be a virtual option until we get some form of all clear, right? So there's a vaccine or we have really high confidence in some treatment that, you know, mitigates illness and death. So we get some form of all clear, then I think we can all go back to school face to face, but we'd continue a virtual option.
Okay. Thank you.
Got some more questions?
Yeah, I just want to verify, it would have to come through the health department to close schools.
I don't know that it would have to, but the order to close schools
Or the state superintendent.
right, it really is whoever, maybe you know this one, the authority lies in whoever is the commissioner of health at the state level. So that's statutorily the authority to close schools for health reasons lies with that position. And so it could be directed, you know, the governor can direct her to close schools. And that's why schools remain closed when the rest of the state, when the rest of the orders in the state that kind of shut everything down, the Supreme Court said, no, all of those go away because that has to be worked through the legislative rulemaking process. But the schools remain closed because that's already in statute as an authority for the Wisconsin Health Department.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I understood that.
Kristen, to your point, you weren't speaking about the whole district, but you're talking about individual schools as well? Like if we needed to close a specific school, do we make that decision independently?
No, I'm at the district.
Okay.
I'm assuming that as an individual school having a breakout, we can be able to close it.
Yes, I think that would be similar to the flu. When the seasonal flu rolls through and the standard kind of number, and I think we'd use the same kind of number when you have about 25% of the kids out with the flu or 25% of the staff out with the flu, they close the school because you can't function anymore. So it's both kind of practicality. You just can't run a school with 25% of the kids or 25% of the adults missing, and it's just better in terms of managing the health situation so you don't continue the flu spread. So similar, I think, with COVID. But I would imagine that before we hit 25% of kids testing positive for COVID or being exposed, the health department will tell us that we're closed.
Gary?
This is Gary. I've mentioned this in the past. Back in 2009, when my kids attended Pershing, we were shut down we were the only school shut down for a week because someone did test positive for swine flu. So there is precedent this district doing a shutdown.
Mm-hmm.
Noah?
I just wanted to clarify that because there's no county health department, the Milwaukee health officer, which during this COVID thing, they did put orders in that were over the entire county. So technically there could be a shutdown that came from that level, but in those instances, that was worked with all the other health officers within the county. So it was an agreed upon thing really. If it's a county-wide situation, if it was located specifically in West Dallas, I would think that would probably come from the West Dallas Health Department, or if it was Hoover and New Berlin, it would come from the Waukesha County because they don't have one for New Berlin.
Good. No, thank you.
Brian?
Yeah, sorry, a couple more. How are we addressing or accommodating the fact that we have teachers that oftentimes travel between schools? options in this type of situation. That's just increasing exposure. So I guess how are we handling that situation?
Deidre is working on that one.
Well, yeah, with Aaron and Jeff Thompson and Jeff Borland, who know a lot about the traveling teachers. So lots of it will depend on, obviously we don't want teachers traveling between schools right now. We don't want to increase risk in any way, shape or form in areas where we could consider not. And so the goal would be to wait and see what we find out from families by school, and then be able to assign particular staff to particular schools. So you might have a gym teacher for a whole week at a school, or a music teacher for a whole week at a school. We still have to figure out, like Marty said, at the very, very start of this, there's a few areas we still need guidance from, and that's part of the conversation tomorrow with the health departments around music and, the transmissions and things like that, and gym and all of those things that we still need further advice on. But for the teachers and the supervision, trying to limit that by they travel in a pod right now, or a group between particular schools. So how do we have them just assigned to one school to provide that extra supervision and the relief during the day, and address their content areas without having them travel between schools? And I think depending on the number of families that sign up to come back 5 days a week or 2 days a week, assuming that we're open, when we're open face-to-face, there are ways to do it to really keep the traveling teachers limited. Or a couple of other districts have left the traveling teacher in one location and they're virtual for part of the day. So if I teach 60% at Franklin and 40% at Hoover, I actually stay at Franklin the whole time, and I just virtually teach for the 40% of my day that I normally would have driven my car over to Hoover and changed exposure or things like that. So it's something in the works.
And then I had one more question. I know we're obviously working under a situation where timing is of a crucial element because we're getting close to the school year. And I believe it was mentioned before that we want to get that communication out to parents possibly by the end of the week in terms of, hey, what will you be choosing out of these options potentially in terms of in school or virtual? My concern is, are we going to know what in-person looks like? Are we going to be asking parents to make that choice without knowing whether or not their children are going to have to wear a mask? Because I know there's some parents that if their children are going to have to wear a mask, are going to look for other options. Conversely, there's parents that if they're not going to be a mask, are going to look for other options. So I guess, what does the timing of all of that look like? And are we going to be asking parents to make decisions without all the information of what that's going to look like?
Unfortunately, but to be honest, the answer is yes. We're all making decisions right now with incomplete information. There's no other way to do it other than within that reality. The circumstances of what we're navigating when we first started to talk about hybrid options to kind of what the circumstances of surges and things across the country are today are really different in a matter of a week. And so, yeah, unfortunately, we're going to live with having to make choices with incomplete information.
Noah?
Has there been any thought, and maybe this is a question for your meeting tomorrow, to requiring those who do come to school in person, and staff included, to have a COVID test done prior to them coming to the building?
Interesting. No, we haven't talked about that. I can just in my engagement with the health department officials, I can already hear somebody saying, remember that test is a point in time test. So somebody, and you don't get immediate results unless you have the, really, really good stuff, really good equipment. So somebody tests negative today and can be positive tomorrow. So that kind of expectation almost means you have to test everybody every day to make that a reliable screen. And so what they're recommending is really these kind of online survey tools that you kind of click on various symptoms where you get advice on whether or not you should, go see your doctor or go to the health department. Some of those kind of things are at least what the health department seem to be recommending for us at this point. But it's an interesting question that I'll kind of put on the list, or I just put it on the list to see how they respond to the idea of it.
Okay, yeah, it is definitely a point in time test. If you don't self-quarantine after taking it, it's pretty much useless, whatever the result is, unless it's positive, I guess. I was just wondering if there was any thought to doing it because X amount of time has gone by, and that kind of gives you a 0 point if you're like, okay, well, I know on this date I didn't have it. So moving forward, that would be like my what I'm looking out for or what things I need to be concerned about because I know on this day I didn't have it.
Kristen?
Is the intent right now to have all staff meetings preparing for school year be virtual?
Yes. Yep. All staff
Then-
meetings, any PD we do, all those kind of things are being planned virtual.
Then it suffices to say, doesn't that make it kind of weird to say then we're going to demand all, option 3 says all elementary students are to attend in person. I feel like
No,
that's
no,
a health risk.
No, that's not correct. Elementary, their parents still have the option of in-person or 2 days in person, 3 days virtual, or all virtual. Right? So part of the hybrid idea is we're trying to accommodate all 3 at the same time. Right? And some of why we're starting with elementary, again, is disease transmission seems to be lower there. And it's where the highest need is for among parents to have elementary kids back in school. So it's trying to find that kind of balance point, but still offering all 3 options for elementary families.
Okay.
Yeah, none of the options require everybody to be in person. So
Correct. Right. At any level, we'd still offer all 3 options, and then ask families to commit for a quarter, and then change. But there, like any expectation, there's always kind of appeals or case-by-case considerations. So we have a family that said we're coming face-to-face, and then somebody tests positive in the house, and well, now we want to just change to virtual for the rest of the quarter. Well, we'd probably say yes, because that kid's probably going to have to quarantine for 2 weeks. So you might as well stay virtual if that's what mom and dad think is the best for that kid.
Christine?
So just to clarify then, the reason that we're asking them to at least commit to the quarter is for planning purposes so that we know. Thank you.
Yep.
Noah?
The 2-day option worries me just because of the back and forth of it all. It seems to bring all the negatives of in person, and you're still having to deal with the virtual. And I also worry that it is because of the extra workload it puts on the staff to have to maintain a 5-day, a 2-day, and a virtual all at the same time in some instances, depending, if we're falling into the secondary going back in person. So I know that we're asking or we're planning to ask families what they want to do. And if there's very little, if we have, now considering everything that's happening, if the survey results are showing that we have very few people who want to do a 2-day a week and 2-day, in person, 2-day not in person, is there a possibility of taking that off the table completely, just saying you're going to go either in person 5 days, or you're going to go or virtual 5 days until we reevaluate and look at things, what's going on in the community?
Yes. Yeah, I think we would. Again, look at what the data are telling us, and it may be that, given the surges that we're seeing across the country and in Wisconsin, maybe it shifts quite a bit from the earlier survey, and maybe we don't want to offer a 5-day in person at all. Cudahy has introduced their model as they're only offering 2-day, the distance learning, the 2-day option, and virtual. And so the 2-day option allows for a little more management of smaller class size and social distancing, because you have half of the kids that want face-to-face at a time. And you get the day in between. I think they're doing Friday as their work planning extra cleaning day. And so that's where they landed. And I think depending on kind of what shows up now, yeah, I think we would consider taking one of the options off the table if it's right. It's not worth the work then if it's a very low number of families that say that's what they need.
I think it's commendable that we're trying to offer something to meet as many needs as possible. But to your point, Marty, with regards to timing and whatnot as well, at some point we may have to make that decision where we have to offer less choices just because of the planning that goes into it and the risk and everything else and the burden on families and staff and asking people to maybe do too much in a timeline where it's short and there's so much uncertainty and we have to change protocol 18 times between now and Thanksgiving. So I think that that's a smart, to at least have that out there to say, we may not be able, this is the plan as of 9:30 on July 20th, but on July 24th, we may have slightly different options because of where we are and what the feedback is and what the health considerations are and everything else. So as long as that's continuing to be understood, then I think we move forward that way. So. Other questions from board members? Obviously there will be. So Marty, do we want emails to you, to me, for the next couple days until we have a follow-up conversation?
Whatever you would like, either way is fine.
And I know we're talking on Thursday to kind of get ready for next week, Monday. So I guess if there's additional comments or things that you could think of after the fact, if you want to email Marty and myself, we can make sure that they get discussed and considered for before it gets discussed by the board next Monday during the meeting. And I would ask that everything be submitted by 9 a.m. Thursday because we do meet later that morning and we have time to make sure that they're all sifted through and that we're able to address everything or look for duplications and things like that. So if there's things that come up after tonight, then I would ask that you guys submit those so we can make sure that they get, so we're not a lot of wild cards thrown out Monday night, but that we can address as many things as possible with as much information behind it when we meet again next week. Kristen?
Yeah, Marty, I already sent you a list of 26 questions I had based off the original draft. So I'm just wondering if you did receive that.
I have to look back. I am so far behind an email right now that it's shameful.
Okay, so I did share with you a document though of questions.
Okay.
Some were addressed tonight, so I'll go through and delete.
Noah?
I know part of what you're meeting on Thursday is to determine what the board in fact has to decide. Some of that may color the questions that may or may not come out of it. So what parts of it that we're going to be actually deciding on Monday, or direction that we're giving or whatever it is. So as soon as those things are determined, I guess would be the better for myself anyways, to determine what questions I want to maybe prioritize if it's not just a general thing about hybrid 3 or whatever it happens to be.
Okay.
Okay. If we are good, then we can move on to the second part of the agenda. I think we've wrapped this part up. So again, keep the conversation going. We'll make sure that as much is addressed and reviewed and researched and as thorough as possible. So then we've got a second item on the agenda for the evening for the workshop, and that is the learning management system. So I will turn that conversation over so we can begin that discussion.
Marty, do you want me to jump right in, or did you want to say anything about this one?
No, I think we've done enough kind of backgrounding of how this kind of fits into the big scenario. So you go right to the detail.
Sounds good. So always good to start a workshop at 9:34. So hopefully we can quickly move our way through this one, because I think we're all on the same page when it comes to the fact that we do need some additional resources for our teachers and for our staff in order to make sure that we're prepared for whatever this is in the fall, in whatever format that we're offering teaching and learning. And so an LMS, for those of you who don't know, is a learning management system. And the learning is that place where you deliver educational courses, training options for staff. The management part, it helps organize all the classes in one space. You can create courses, assign courses in it, track courses, and track course completion. And then the system part is that it's an online platform. And it's just kind of a place where you house all of the pieces that you need for the lens of the teaching and learning. What we did to kind of narrow down our choices, because much like several other things that we have to make some very quick decisions on, this is one that we had to have kind of a quick turnaround between the time that we decided, yes, it was important for us to have a learning management system, and to bring it forward to our board for adoption next week, Monday. We also, though, wanted to honor the fact that we want as much teacher input as possible when we make a decision like this that's going to affect them and the way that they do their work every day. So what we did as a team, as our leadership and learning team, was we reviewed several of the options that are online. What's out there that are good for learning management systems? We looked at what did we previously use as a school district, and did we like those platforms? Did we not? We looked at the parent survey feedback, and that was really important from the staff and the parent survey feedback. It was really important because we wanted to know from them, like, what did you feel went really well about distance learning in the spring? And then what did you feel was missing? And the feedback we got from teachers were a couple of, like, we needed better tools and a few things that allowed some of the work to be easier. And then from parents, a lot of the feedback we got was, we needed to know more about what the tools were and how to use them at home. And we needed all the things to be in one place because there were way too many. First, I had to log into this, and then I had to log into this from the parent end. And I've made a couple of jokes about that. My husband did some of the at-home learning with us, and he said to me several times, you introduce one more thing, like, I don't know what a Weebly is. And I thought, oh, right, you don't work in education. So I'm empathetic to those families who were trying to navigate through all those pieces during that time. But what we were looking for in the platforms that we reviewed were the ease of use for teachers, the integration with what we already use that teachers prefer, that they like, and that works well for us. And then the ease of use for parents, like what are the parent communication tools and those pieces. Our history as a school district is at one point we used Blackboard, and at one point we had Moodle, and they were platforms on which you loaded all of your coursework and all of those things. And then they were accessible. The idea at that time was that we'd be able to use them in a more blended format to do a lot more blended learning. And then over time, we dropped the learning management system and just haven't picked one up. We haven't, we've had the beauty of allowing teachers a lot of autonomy and what those tools are in their classrooms that they use across settings. And now we're just being driven by a need where we do need some more uniformity to some of those pieces. So the team that reviewed, let me go backwards. The team that reviewed our choices is on the screen, so you can see. We had representation from most groups. The one thing we didn't end up with were a lot of specialists. And so apologize that we didn't have more of them on the committee, but again, we put one together in relatively short order to get some feedback from staff so that we could review the two choices that we narrowed it down to and then get some honest feedback from this group. And the two that we landed on, as Marty indicated earlier, were Canvas and Schoology. And the reason we landed on those two was a variety of things. One, we wanted to be sure that we only considered ones that conversed easily with Skyward, because that's important to us, like on a daily basis. We wanted to be sure that the ones that we were considering worked well for our technology department. So I had some conversations with Frohn around that to make sure that we weren't bringing in something that wasn't going to be compatible to other things that we already had. We talked to several area districts to find out what are you using and why are you using that, and do you like it and do you not like it. And so many of the districts in our area are going with Canvas, because most districts right now are adopting a learning management system if they didn't already have one. Most districts in our area are going with Canvas. The biggest reason a lot of them have told us they're going with Canvas is because that's what's used at the university level. And so our team really reviewed whether or not that was a driving factor in making a decision, or whether or not the platform itself, the ability to communicate with families, all of those pieces were a more overriding decision than whether or not the kids would see that same platform again at the college level for our students who choose to go on to college. So we went, our overall recommendation is for Schoology, and I'll show you a little kind of comparison next. And then several of the teachers who were with us in the committee that we put together are with us tonight and have offered to share some of their feedback as well. So when we looked at the two, we were comparing key factors for us, right? So cost is a key factor. Put a plus in both because they're pretty comparable when it comes to cost. One, that was not a factor that was so significant of a difference in cost that would have driven the decision between one or the other. The staff, as they reviewed both platforms, thought the ease of use for staff with Schoology was a lot higher. Canvas was actually designed for the university system, and it's been adapted to the K-12 public education market, whereas Schoology was actually designed for K-12 education. And so it's a little bit more user-friendly, especially for some of our elementary teachers. The integration of platforms, they both speak very well to Google, but Schoology actually will integrate everything that's in the Google Classrooms that teachers created in the spring already, so they don't lose any of that work. And a big driving factor for us was that it communicates back and forth with Seesaw, which is a platform that many of our schools are already using. So it provided another element of something teachers are using and they're familiar with that would easily integrate into our LMS. Ease of use for families, Schoology came out pretty high in all the comparisons that we looked at for that one. Families actually get their own login of Schoology so that they can log in. There's training videos for parents. There's a way to track from the teacher's end which parents have logged in, which parents have actually accessed some of the training videos, so that you can provide that additional support to families to say, hey, you know, don't forget you have this option for learning this platform on your own with some of the videos and the options that are out there for families. It has a ton of communication tools for families that the teachers appreciated about that one. The professional development support for both, they both got a plus for that. They seem to have pretty robust, based on the reviews, professional development support. With as many districts in our area jumping onto Canvas, I have no idea what that would be like to set up professional development with them, but I know with Schoology, it'll be relatively easy in our area. She's already setting aside some potential dates for us if we do, in fact, approve the adoption next week. Relatability to the college level, again, Canvas wins on that one. More of the colleges are using Canvas than use Schoology, but again, I think our kids are pretty adaptable and not as worried about kids leaving their senior year in high school and not being able to figure out Canvas when they go to the secondary level, the post-secondary level. The technology support was about the same, and then they both communicate with Skyward on a pretty even keel basis. So those were some of the things that the team considered. And we got together for a couple of hours with that large group, and then we split into smaller teams and we got logins and we played around in both platforms and came back. And the groups really said in a lot of cases they could have lived with either platform and they didn't mind either one. They lent more on Schoology because of the communication, especially with Seesaw. That is something Canvas does not do. And the support that it provided to families. And so those were kind of the two really big, and just the look and the feel of it for our staff was more appealing. So just a peek into what it would look like, as this is a screen. Oh, yeah.
I'm sorry, I wasn't here in the beginning. Should we hold the questions to the end?
Oh, sorry, no, I didn't even say if you should hold the questions to the end. Either way is fine. You can ask questions as we go. This is we're almost to the end of the presentation because I knew we'd be going pretty late into the evening here. So yeah, feel free.
I was just wondering about the Seesaw thing. I know not all of our schools use it. So will we be, if we went with Schoology, would we be like saying, hey, you should switch over to Seesaw?
No, that's a great question. We're not forcing any of the schools to switch into Seesaw. It's not a requirement. Some districts use Seesaw actually as their LMS for K4 through first grade. But for our teams that have been using Seesaw for a while, and a couple of our teachers that are on tonight can talk about that a little bit too, because they use it have for years and in a really robust way. The fact that it communicates directly with Schoology is really helpful. So it means the teacher can keep going with a lot of the ways they're communicating with families and the way students are building portfolios, and the systems will work together to keep all of that information in one spot.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. And so this is just a sneak peek at what it looks like. So this one that I'm looking at right here is an ecology section. And so you can kind of just see, this is the teachers putting in videos and lessons that are appropriate to the topic at hand. On the right-hand side, you can see the reminders to the students, and this is the teacher login, the reminder to the teacher on how many ungraded assignments are sitting out there, how many things are sitting out there waiting for the teacher to have input. There's communication tools left, right, and center. There's a way to integrate it to your email so that you're communicating again out of one spot. So that's kind of one view. This is what it would look like if I was a student to log in. And so you can see that my subjects are all right there. And if I would click on one, it'll take me to the content or all the materials for that one class right there. So as a student or as a family, that's what I'm gonna see when my child opens up their page is, here's everything kind of all in one place. And that would be true of, that's how most learning management systems look. This is just the way in particular this one looks in Schoology. And then here's one more example, whoops. One more example, that's from a calculus class. And so they have links to other platforms in here that you can see. There's the ability to link Alex lessons. There's ability to add additional materials. There's an ability to build quizzes and tests and assessment pieces in here. There's some tools for progress monitoring built into it. That will allow us, the big goal being to continue doing what we're doing on the frame that we want to think about planning for school as if it's all virtual, and then use the in-face time and things like that to provide the most flexibility. But also we want to be sure we're increasing the rigor that we, without the planning time in the spring, that we weren't 100% sure. We did really, really well by all of our families and our learners, but in order to really ensure that academic progress is moving forward, we want to be sure that we're being as rigorous as we would have been should we be seeing the kids in the classroom every day and we get that opportunity back again. The next section is some feedback from staff. So we have a couple of staff members who are with us on the small committee who are willing to share kind of their thoughts. And Kelly, I'm hoping I can pick on you for a second. I see you there on my screen. You just want to share from the team why you preferred Schoology to Canvas and kind of what your thoughts are. Kelly's a special education teacher at Frank Lloyd Wright.
Sure. I guess when I was looking at both of them, again, we could have gone with either one. I would have been able to handle both, but I guess my preference for the Schoology was based on for families. Last year being virtual, there were so many times that they were lost or confused and they were getting emails from every place. And just to have one consistent place where we can, have communication with emails, assignments, and for the parents to actually use it and feel comfortable with it rather than being confused. Because we know that once a family's lost on any form of platform, they're not going to come back and they're not going to believe in what's happening. And so the Schoology just seemed a little more user friendly and had a parent program where they could actually learn how to use it. It actually trained them to use it rather than me having to send out an email or a training bit for them to watch a video. It actually did it right for them. So it just seemed for ease of use for families was the best, which in turn makes it easier for me to teach.
Thanks, Cal. And Angela Gorlowski, who is the innovation coach at Central, is also on tonight and said she didn't mind sharing some of her thoughts. So Angela, if I can pass it over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. I wanted to just echo what Kelly said. I would say overall, we felt like I would be willing to go either way. And I think everyone else in the group that I was in felt that way as well. But Schoology kind of had the edge because it had a little bit more user-friendly features that not only for families, but for teachers as well. It kind of has like an interface that looks kind of like Facebook from like 10 years ago, which is, I think, like a pro, to be honest with you, because I think that means it'll be hopefully a little bit easier for all of us to take advantage of. And I also think I am a student at UWM, so I utilize Canvas as a student quite often, and it's quite user-friendly, but I've been doing some work like of building things like portfolios, and Deidre, you could probably talk about this more, but I felt like on that end, it was quite confusing. It wasn't as user-friendly as I hoped it would be, and Schoology just seemed to be a little bit more user-friendly on that front.
And Stacy Christensen, who's a teacher at Walker, is also on the call tonight and said she wouldn't mind sharing some of her thoughts. So I'll pass it over to Stacy.
Hi. Okay, so for an elementary younger point of view, I can say that one of the things that for parents that sometimes we would email from both Seesaw and from like our Google email, and it would give a central place for parents to be able to communicate with us. That was one of the more positive parts of this. And also something that I liked, in the elementary, we have the I can statements. And it seemed as though like we were really looking to see, it seemed like that we might be able to load on some of the I can statements and add our own rubrics. That would be more user-friendly for elementary. And it seemed like Canvas didn't have that aspect. So that that would be easier for teachers when it comes to being able to look at each of the benchmarks and being able to grade for that. So, and when it came to as far as if we did do anything that was virtual, it easily linked on to, like, we're so familiar with Zoom right now, but it also had Google Hangouts, and it was compatible to a lot of different types of ways that we could reach our students virtually. So that those were all the different reasons. It just seemed like it was much more compatible, I know, for elementary kids.
Awesome.
Teachers.
Thank you, Stacy. And Brian, we didn't talk about you talking tonight, Mr. Summerfield, but if you don't mind, I know you had a chance to review it with your ILT at Central. And so if you don't mind us making a few, share with the group just some of the feedback that they had that you were kind enough to share with me. Oh, I think you're muted.
Your headphones.
Yeah.
Oh,
There you go.
Hear me? Okay. Yeah, just to echo what Angela and many of the teachers have already said, it's Schoology's ability to pick up so quickly was kind of, I think, the deciding factor from a staff perspective. Canvas is great. Canvas is used in the universities. That's awesome. But it seemed to be a little more complicated. And I think that was kind of the final decision for us to kind of go with Schoology. And, you know, the ILT kind of had the same opinion. They were concerned a little bit with the Google Classroom transition. Our staff did an outstanding job of picking up Google Classroom, I mean, very quickly. And they put a lot of work into that. So the concern was, is all that work going to kind of be put away? And I know, Deidre, you and I talked about how Schoology can do everything Google Classroom can do. And actually some of those lessons and things they've done in Google Classroom can be easily transitioned into Schoology. So I think that was kind of another factor for us. Yeah, I think there's some concerns about a whole new platform, but I think in the long run, especially with the Skyward ease and the Skyward compatibility, there's going to be more positives than negatives.
And then Jenny, I saw that you were on Jenny Day, if you wanted to add anything, because Jenny had the chance to review everything as well. And she teaches 5K at Man, so.
Can you hear me? I don't know if.
Yep.
Okay, sorry, I did something weird on my computer, so I could not tell. I also lean toward Schoology, especially with the littles and the family, because I teach kindergarten. A lot of what I assign, it's the parents do have to help. So the ease with Schoology over Canvas also helped me lean more towards Schoology as well. And pretty much everything everybody else said. You can also, unlike Google Classroom, in Schoology, you can actually embed videos and not post links, which makes all of that a lot easier.
Yeah, thank you. And so we tried to have a pretty broad representation on the committee, just so that we were looking at it from the lens of elementary, intermediate, and high school. It seemed to be that people either had really, really strong feelings about not liking Canvas. We got some feedback that some people who had used it before didn't really appreciate it. And yet again, I think it is a really good platform, and I used it to teach at UWM, and on the teacher end, it's not that bad, but I also only teach once a week. So it's a lot easier for me because I only have to upload everything once a week. I don't know what it would be like to manage multiple courses in it. And so again, the idea was that we got feedback from multiple levels. One of the big things that we wanted to be sure it also could do is have multiple teachers on each classroom collaborating together, because most of our sections are co-taught. It has an unlimited capacity to do that as well. So it really allowed for a lot of collaborative space for teachers and multiple teachers to be assigned. It's one of the frustrations that some of our staff have about Skyward, actually, is that you can't assign multiple teachers to a section. So it just makes the work that much harder. And so it's nice in here that you can assign multiple teachers to a section. And then a flexible space to be able to track some information in the fall, especially again with the flexibility that we're going to need was really important. And so it seems to have the features that we were looking for. The other considerations were making sure we had enough professional development days added. And so they have kind of a 3-tiered plan for that, where you can have 1 team trained, 2 teams trained, or 3 teams trained as kind of master trainers. And then they have an extensive amount of videos and all kinds of tools available. So we added in the maximum amount that they offer when it comes to professional development. This will be a short turnaround for our staff, and we want to be sure that they have the right supports to utilize the tool in the best way possible. Another consideration was parent access. So there is a small fee for a parent library of resources, but we thought that was really important, especially given some of the feedback that we got from our families, and that was something that they were interested in and wanted us to pursue more of, our resources for them for when students are learning from home. And then teacher support throughout the school year. So the Schoology rep is very close to us, actually. She's just over the border in Illinois. And so she said, right now they're doing all their trainings virtually, but that she would be pretty accessible to us, given the fact that she's so physically close. If we should need her to come, or if it was safe to come and do some in-person trainings, that she'd be able to do that throughout the school year and be able to provide continuous support to our staff. So those were all kind of important features. The grand total for the cost on year 1 and the estimate right now. So this is just the first cost estimate, and then we go through a series of working with each company to try to figure those out. Is $54,396,000, and that includes all the teacher training, the access to the licenses, the parent portal, the parents having their own access, the parent library. All of those pieces go into that dollar amount. And so we'll continue to work with them on that, as again, that was just our first quote from them. But we will continue to talk to them about price and make sure that is actually competitive with everything else that's out there, and then come back to the board next week for a final recommendation to adopt and purchase. Any other questions for us? Yeah, Stephanie.
Yeah. So parent access, I think when we launched, I don't remember which system it was now, but at some point when we launched a system, we did like some tutorial videos for families so that they knew how to access it, how to set it up, all those kinds of things. I'm assuming we'll do something similar so the parents can know how to do that. Collaboration for the kids on school, I keep wanting to say Schoology, but it's Schoology, so I'm having a hard time without that extra syllable in there. Is there collaboration available for the kids on there too? Obviously there is some of the teachers on the back end, but can the kids collaborate on a lesson or on a project like you can in Google Classroom?
Yep, they have some of those same features in there. And then there's a couple of other collaborative spaces that we've started to investigate, because again, we want more of that, not less of it, as we go into the fall. And so, but any of those are things that could be embedded right into there as well.
Great, okay.
Yeah,
Kristen,
and the nice part about that teacher training video, sorry, Stephanie, I didn't mean to interrupt, but the nice part about the teacher training videos is Schoology has done all of those for our staff. So the staff doesn't have to, like Kelly was saying, like recreate all of that on top of learning it themselves. And I went through, I watched, bits and pieces of a couple of the videos, and they were like pretty good. They were, ones that I thought, oh, our parents will be able to access these, and they were pretty easy to follow. So that takes a whole piece off of teachers' plates right now, which is important.
And I'm assuming that the videos for families to learn are going to be in multiple languages as well. So
that's the one question I sent back to them today, is to be sure that they were, because if not, then obviously we want to have a bunch of things translated, and that might be a consideration for us. So it was a question I stumbled upon today, and I couldn't find the answer, so I didn't hear back yet, but I will have that information by next Monday.
Great. Okay, Kristen and then Noah.
I think I have 2 quick questions. One would be, if we purchase this, would we make it required for teachers to use for their virtual learning, and if we need to switch that quickly, for multiple years? Because I'm pretty sure my kids have been in the district for 6 years, and I'm on my 4th platform, so I don't think it can last me a whole while now.
Yes, it could be the one that goes forward. The costs get less year after year because after the first year and you do the setup and all of those pieces, then you're just paying the license fee per student. We wouldn't want to be changing around and doing a bunch of different things from one year to the next. And honestly, although the driving need right now is to have an LMS, they're not a bad idea under any circumstance anyway. And they always provide you with some flexibility, and they have some of the security pieces and all of those pieces embedded in them that would be good for us to have.
And it would be, this is something that we would require teachers to use.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Because it has to be. And that was the other important thing for the committee is we wanted to choose something that can be used for K through 12th grade. And I ran that by my work team as well when we met last week Friday, and just said that was a piece of the teaching and learning parts that we have to figure out right now. And I have a parent on my group who has got kids in multiple levels, and she said, I'd have one thing and I would have one. And she was very, very excited about that. So I thought, okay, yep. So yeah, it would be required because it again provides us that flexibility that we need.
So
works for me.
Noah, you were next, and then then Gary, you'll can be after that. Even though you guys are talking to each other, so maybe
I was just gonna
share
say,
your questions.
joint questions in one room.
2 questions. First, I was wondering if this is something that we wanted to go forward with, if looking for a multi-year cost break might be useful, just because I know that there is some funding specifically set forward for being able to do virtual learning more efficiently, and maybe making use of those funds to get something that maybe we could pay for up front, but then not have to pay for in multiple years.
I didn't ask them that question yet, but it's a good one, and I'll certainly add that to the conversation I'll have between now and next Monday, and I'll have an answer for that by next Monday.
Okay. And then the other question I'm looking an answer for, it's getting late. How much setup time would there be if we went forward with this to be able to get Schoology set up, ready to rock and roll, people trained on it so that we could use it for the school year?
So the rep that I spoke to, Jennifer, she said that she thought we had more than enough time if we made an approval next week to get things set up. She said on the setup is minimal. It's just getting the teachers in and trained as quickly as possible. And so I asked her to collect some tech specs and things like that for our technology department so that we could be sure those 2 systems were working together pretty easily and going forward. She said they do use single sign-on, which is what we use for all of our things in our district. And so I think that will also expedite some of those pieces as far as the communication. But the rep felt really confident we could be ready to go for some training within those first few weeks of August as long as we got an approval next week. She said if we waited 2 more weeks, we'd have a hard time getting things together before school started, which is why we expedited this the way we did.
Okay, and I also want to thank those teachers for staying here so late with us so we could hear their opinions.
I'm messaging many of them saying, if you can't stay because this is getting so late, don't feel like you have to. I did have statements in the PowerPoint just in case we needed it.
Gary, go ahead.
Okay. So first question. So I just wanted for clarification, is this replacing Google Classroom?
It could replace Google Classroom, but it doesn't, for the teachers that have already built things in Google Classroom, they'll translate over. But no, students would not be logging in separately to their Google Classroom and separately to this. They'd be embedded into this.
Okay, so if some teachers still use Google Classroom, everybody would still use this?
Yes.
Okay, so this is a requirement. Google Classroom is an optional tool for other things.
Yeah, if they were already building everything in Google Classroom and they just wanted to translate right into this, again, I haven't actually done a translation between the 2, but according to the rep, they just transfer right in. And that's what all the online information said as well about the platform. So for our teachers that are comfortable building their classes in Google Classroom, then it would just all translate over. But what they may find, it's just easier to build them right in the platform as well, and then they'd have the option to do that. But either way, the place where the student and the family would access it would be in the learning management system.
Okay, I guess one of my concerns, I work in technology and I see people use certain tools and then we try to transition to other tools and they're stuck in the ways and they're previous tool. So getting them to kind of move over if we're trying to get everybody in the same platform. I mean, I don't want to force anybody, but if we're trying to get everybody into the same learning management system, you know, how do we get that going? And next question I have is how does Schoology integrate with Alex and StudySync?
Yeah, so those are really good questions. Those are accessible as online platforms. So we were building in a lot of the links to some of those things into the Google Classroom. So it would look the same as that. But that is on my list of questions as well for the rep when I talk to her next. Like, is there a better or an easier integration between the two?
Okay, and then I just wanted to reiterate something Noah had mentioned about the multi-year. If we could get a multi-year license, again, a deal on a multi-year license, if we think this is a tool that we want to use for, you know, the next few years, if we're, you know, sold on this tool, that would be something to consider.
Yep. Yeah, I added that to my list. And again, like I said, it's on my list of things to talk to them about this week so I can make sure we're coming forward with a comprehensive proposal next week, Monday.
Great, thank you. And yeah, thank you for everybody who participated in the committee.
Deidre, does this add, I don't know, greater visibility, like for students who might switch schools? You know, if teachers are able to see like where they're at and some of the things that they're doing on Schoology to see, you know, if they've transferred from elementary schools and then as they move on to intermediate, that they can kind of track that progress as well. Is there some consistency there?
Yeah, it does allow you to do that tracking between schools, and especially if students move back and forth between some of our schools, which would be nice. The one thing that Jenny Day had asked me to look into is what's the learning management system that MPS uses, because we have so many students that transfer back and forth between us and MPS, but I have not had any luck finding that out yet. And so I don't know that Marty did a little digging on their website and we didn't come up with anything when we did some digging on their website, and we put out some feelers to some people and we didn't hear back yet on what they use. And so I think we're going to have to go forward without that knowledge. But yes, it would allow you to have some access to student like profiles and things that they had completed over time.
Okay, great. Kristen, you had a couple more questions? You're still muted.
I think it was a little bit toward Gary when you said, you know, like teachers switching to another platform. They switched to virtual overnight. So I have a lot of faith in our teachers to pick up on something that we can all use across the board. So.
Yep.
I do too. And I think this is actually a tool that's going to make things easier, not harder. And so that is also the thing that we're looking for to support our teachers as best we can right now.
Is there a mobile app or a mobile version as well for families as they're like on the go and stuff that they can access things mobilely?
There are apps, yeah. For most of the LMSs, there's an app. Schoology has an app. We found some reviews that were kind of mixed on the app. So that's some further questions that I have for the rep too, to say
okay.
That's something that you guys are working on to improve. We weren't sure 100% of the feedback that we were finding online was accurate. Apparently it looked like a lot of it was from trolls. So.
Oh yes, the internet language. Okay. Yeah, other questions? Deidre, if there's, so some of the questions that came up today with regards to the multi-year and some of the other questions, will that be included on in the board update prior to Monday? So we'll have that information before this comes on the agenda?
Yeah, I will include it as soon as I can possibly get my hands on it. So yeah, I just have to figure out a time that I can connect with the rep. I said to Marty when they, we first put out a thing, she said, well, I can meet with you Friday at 5 o'clock. And I was like, well, I guess I'll take what slots I can get right now. But yeah, so I'm hoping to be able to connect with her tomorrow and ask some of those follow-up questions, and then for sure. But if not, then I'll try to get it. I'll have it all to Suzette by Friday so that it will go out in some of the notice so you guys will know kind of where we landed on those things.
Perfect. Any other questions for Deidre or our wonderful staff who have been testing this? And thank you to everybody for sticking around. We haven't had a real late meeting in a while. This is even earlier than I thought we'd be. So good job, everybody, for focusing. All right, any other questions? Going once, going twice. All right, thank you, everybody. If not, we'll look for a motion then to adjourn the workshop.
Motion to adjourn workshop.
And seconded somewhere, right? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, thank you, everybody. Stay safe, take care of yourselves, take care of each other.